Chapter 546. At that time, outside the city, the young scholar, who could obviously control a sword, actually pulled out his saber. After killing people like they were nothing, he stabbed the saber into the mouth of Mao Ro, who was lying on the ground. He twisted the blade and twisted it, not forgetting to say to the corpse, "Who asked you to brag?" Most of the Golden Knights who still had fighting strength completely collapsed and began to flee. Su Fengyin did not chase after these stragglers. He cut off Mao Ro's head and staggered back with it. He saw a clean and elegant man standing at the city gate. Su Fengyin remained silent and was about to unsheath his spring and autumn annals. The man blocked the sword and said calmly, "I am Su Pu, an old soldier of Bailiang. Before coming to Dunhuang, I was a kamikaze soldier of my friend Li Yishan." The red-eyed Su Fengyin was slightly startled. He asked, "Su Pu, the governor of Bailiang's 12 light cavalry battalions?" The man knelt on one knee and said softly with a hoarse voice, "I am Su Pu. Greetings to His Royal Highness." In Bailiang Palace, not to mention Su Zhao's kamikaze soldiers who could not see the light of day, the old man wearing a sheepskin coat who suppressed Sir Tide Listener and the ninth blade old Huang who hid his strength, the next person was Su Pu, whom he had never met before. His identity was very special. He had once been a third-rank official and had a similar position in the army as Wuxia, who had taught Chen Jibao the war Immortal. The two men's reputations among Bailiang's 300,000 cavalrymen could be said to be on par. However, Su Pu's image was more of a scholarly general. As for why he later gave up his position and became a kamikaze soldier, it was destined to be a secret that no one knew. Su Pu's eyes were sincere and warm. He helped carry the box that had once contained the Spring Thunder Saber and smiled. "Your Highness can rest assured and adjust your breath. Although I am not as heroic as your Highness, I still have some skills left. No one will be able to disturb me as we head north." The Spring Thunder Saber had already killed nearly 200 cavalrymen after no less than 60 swings. It was trembling in its master's hands. It was clearly at its limit. Su Fengyin covered his chest and calmed himself down. He asked with a frown, "Will Uncle Su's identity be exposed?" Su Pu shook his head. "It doesn't matter. According to Li Yishan's plan, Dunhuang City was to be turned upside down. I had to show my face. Even if your Highness didn't make a move." Su Fengyin slowly entered the city. When he heard this, he sneered, "At that time, Uncle Su will collect Sweet Potato's corpse. Shed tears of sympathy?" Su Pu's expression remained unchanged as she nodded. Sensing his murderous intent, Su Pu was vaguely displeased. She didn't even try to hide it. She said bluntly, "Does your Highness care so much about these matters of the heart?" Su Pu did not speak. After a long silence, they could see the eaves of the roof of the giant Immortal Palace. Su Fengyin seemed to be talking to himself. "If I cannot protect a woman today, even if I become king of Bailiang in the future and take over 300,000 cavalrymen, what do you think I can protect?" Su Pu laughed. 20 years. The anger that had accumulated in his heart for 20 years was swept away. He laughed until tears came out. Su Fengyin turned to look in puzzlement. Su Pu put away his expression and finally showed respect from the bottom of his heart. He said with a smile, "In the past, Li Yishan and Zhao Chongling had a dispute. Li Yishan said you could be king of Bailiang. Zhao Chongling did not agree and said Chen Jibao was enough. There is no harm in having a different surname to hold the banner." Su Fengyin's lips jerked. It was difficult for him to squeeze out a smile. If not for the fact that he did not dare to waste the 2 Diana golden pill he had taken into his stomach and kept most of its essence in his Shuquan point, it was hard to say if he would have died in this battle. He asked curiously, "Then what does Uncle Su think?" Su Pu narrowed his eyes and looked into the city. He said softly, "In Su Pu's view, if your Highness chose to stand at the city gates, the chances of victory were 50-50. But after entering the city, Li Yishan won against Zhao Chongling." Su Pu suddenly said, "Li Yishan said that Wuxia would not rely on your Highness because of family ties. Did your Highness see him when he rushed to Beimang?" Su Fengyin's expression was dark. "Maybe I did not see him, but he saw me." At this time the scene was so silent one could hear a pin drop. No one dared to accept the challenge. At some unknown time, the Mao family and many other factions that had tried to attack Giant Immortal Palace were surrounded by other factions and had their paths of retreat blocked. Other than the Imperial Mending platform that was still calm, the Yuan family, the Duanmu family and others stopped watching. They moved out in full force. The mantis stalked the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. What marriage, what many years of friendship, what was cold without the lips, What was more practical than eliminating the power that these traitors would bring? Su Fengyin looked at the boorish men of the Jianghu and sneered. You want silver? How much the Mao family gives you, giant Immortal Palace will give you double. How about it? Su Pu smiled as he put down the bookcase and started to kill people. As the governor of the 60,000 light cavalry of the Bailiang army, when had he not killed people with his own hands? Su Fengyin walked forward with his sword and blade. The situation was decided and no one dared to stop him. He walked in front of the embroidered-robed woman and raised his hand as though he was about to hit her. She had tears in her eyes and did not dodge at all. Sweet Potato hugged the red-robed man tightly. He bit his lips so hard that the blood stained his lips. Su Fengyin only reached out and pinched her cheek. He glared at her and said, You're about to die. Do you really think I can forget you? As a servant girl, can't you let your young master have some peace of mind? Let's take a step back and say, as a woman, can't you let your man shelter you from the wind and rain? Chapter 547. Chapter 2, around 12 o'clock in the evening. This time I got heat stroke and took a good rest. In the last few days there have been a lot of new Zhuangyuan. I will try to thank them one by the end of the month. P.S. I hope there will be more suggestions and criticism in the book review section and Tieba. I will read them all. If there is something, I will correct it. If there is nothing, I will encourage it. PS2. I feel like in the blink of an eye, the second volume is about to reach 100 chapters. Under Sweet Potato's instruction, they followed the military book's policy of besieging the city, deliberately leaving a way out. It was obvious that Tao Yong was willing to abandon the foundation of Dunhuang. He took the lead in abandoning the Mao family, which had lost its backbone, and escaped with his trusted subordinates. The old general of Jinxi province, Lu Wu, had no choice. His whole family and his life were hanging in the city. Before he died bravely in battle, he loudly begged Sweet Potato not to cut the weeds and pull out the roots, so that his Lu family could survive. Sweet Potato ignored him. Lu Wu died with his eyes open. The Mao family's retainers were all killed in battle. It was clear that Mao Rui, father and daughter, did not have moral integrity, but in terms of raising their soldiers, they indeed had a unique ability. Su Pu slaughtered the Jianghu guards outside the palace. The remaining surviving cavalrymen were scared out of their wits. They threw away their weapons and prostrated themselves on the ground. Su Pu casually picked up an iron spear and returned confidently. He saw Sweet Potato as well as Su Fengyin, who was sitting on a bookcase to regulate his breathing and recuperate. Sweet Potato wanted to say something but hesitated. Su Fengyin laughed and said, Dunhuang is your city, you know best the pros and cons, don't worry about me, just do what you need to do. This Uncle Su is my Shifu's best friend, you can trust him. Greetings, Governor. Sweet Potato curled her skirt and gently performed a Wan Fu gesture. First private then official. With a stern countenance she said, I will have to trouble Uncle Su to lead 50 cavalrymen to pursue and annihilate Tao Yong, leaving him alone to return to Orange Province. This can be considered Dunhuang City giving Murong Baoding some face. Uncle Su will lead the troops to the Imperial Mending Platform. You don't have to do anything. Su Pu accepted the order and left. A few old eunuchs and female officials from the Palace of Purple Gold who were lucky enough to survive also followed behind this strange middle-aged man. With a few words, Su Pu roped in 50 to 60 golden knights who wanted to atone for their crimes and charged toward the Imperial Mending Platform that was either wavering or biding its time. Su Fengyin had been sitting on his book box the whole time to heal himself. Although he looked like he was covered in blood, he was actually only lightly injured and his external injuries were not serious. However, his meridians were severely damaged. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was able to fight against 500 cavalry alone. Although the Mao family iron cavalry lacked experts to oversee them, they still had to rely on Su Fengyin's iron fist and the promise of generous rewards to hide in the thickest part of the cavalry formation. She ordered the cavalry to launch continuous attacks, throwing spears and crossbows. Later on, she even used the method of charging dozens of cavalry at the same time. Among them, some of the cavalry captains who were slightly more powerful took advantage of the opportunity to ambush Su Fengyin. It could be said that if both sides were playing chess on the chessboard mountain, they only cared about the lives of the chess pieces and did not care about the hearts of the people. Even if Su Fengyin risked his life to kill 100 cavalry, he would still be doomed to die outside the city gate. However, when Spring and Autumn used the Sword Chi rolling wall and the Green Dragon sleeve to open the way and used the Spring Thunder Saber to stab Mao Ro to death, it was as if he had beheaded a general in an army. The Iron Cavalry's morale fell to the bottom and they could no longer gather their momentum. It was reasonable for the army to be defeated like a landslide. Even if Su Fengnian had 50 to 60% of his Great Yellow Hall realm in the initial stage of Vajra realm, he would still need to recuperate for 20 years to recover. This bloody battle was no less thrilling than the death battle with Tuoba Chunsun and the other two experts on the grassland. In the marketplace, it was like a strong young man fighting three men of the same age. In the eyes of the onlookers, it was very exciting. The latter was like risking his life against hundreds of children, being entangled endlessly, bitten several times, dozens of times, or even hundreds of times. It was equally hair-raising. Su Fengnian calmly looked at those Jianghu people who, after the dust had settled, looked somewhat nervous. He then looked at the sturdy old man who had fallen to the ground dead. This Dunhuang City's Lu family had originally wanted to put on a tiger that would not fall down. Before he died, he would crush his iron spear into the ground and hold it with both hands until he died. However, very quickly he was hacked down by some people's sabers and trampled over. Some astute Jianghu people fought as they walked. They approached the corpse, pretended to roll on the ground, got close to the old man's body, and with a touch, stole the jade pendant on his waist. Several people who were slow to act followed suit, rolling back and forth on Lu Wu's corpse. They did not even let go of the jade inlaid buckle, which was taken away. There was only one ox leather boot left on his feet. It was said that the dead were the most important, but in Jianghu, who cared about being the most important? At this time, other than the two fragrant maids curled up in the corner of the carriage, the rest of the Mao family were already dead. A sharp-eyed Wuling man wanted to go to the carriage to have a good time. Even if he did not take off his pants and did not work, it would be good to have a good time. In the end, Su Pu, who was riding on top of him, happened to stab him in the back with a spear. With a twist of the spearhead, his body was torn in half. No one dared to mess around in the chaos. Su Fengnian had already put the spring thunder saber back into the box. A blood-stained scarlet spring and autumn sword lay across his knees. He said to Sweet Potato, who was standing beside him, "How do we appease the many forces that have surrendered?" Sweet Potato thought for a moment and said, "These aftermath matters should be handed over to Governor Su Pu. I should have died outside the palace gate. It is not good to draw legs on a snake." She smiled. "Since the young master is here, of course it is up to you to make the decision." Su Fengnian furrowed his brows. "I will only watch. I won't talk or do anything. But first you have to arrange a passable identity for me. Right, even you know Su Pu. Will anyone recognize him as the former governor of the 12th Light Cavalry Battalion of the Bailiang Army? Chapter 548. Sweet Potato shook her head and said, "No, this servant knows Su Pu because Imperial Tutor Li Yishan mentioned the governor when he was teaching the brocade pouch at Tide Listening Pavilion. Moreover, the transmission of information between Liang and Mang was too expensive. It was all exchanged with human lives. Secret agents and spies had to be carefully selected. It was impossible for them to take care of everything, no matter how big or small. It was also impossible for them to have the ability to investigate an old general of northern Liang who had not shown his face for 20 years. Our Bailiang can be said to be the place that pays the most attention to infiltration and counterinfiltration of the two dynasties. From what this servant knows, Bailiang has a secret organization. Other than targeting Great Peace City and the vassals, it spares no effort on the Baimang Imperial Tent and the capital of the southern dynasties. All of this is handled by Master's Master. It is watertight." Su Fengnian said self-deprecatingly, "Benevolent people do not join the army, benevolent people do not command soldiers. I think that while Su Pu's impression of me has changed, it is probably not much better." Sweet Potato said sadly, "It is all this servant's fault." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "You are really wrong this time. If not for you, I insisted on being a hero and returning to the city. Su Pu may not have knelt and called me His Royal Highness. At most, he would have called me uncle and nephew. You do not know, these famous generals from the spring and autumn period are all arrogant and untamed. They value military merit far more than relationships. Su Pu is a rare exception. Like that strategist Zhao Chongling, who is called the right hand of my master, they all say that 3 years old can tell one's age. But before I was born, Su Xiao did not have an heir. He predicted that the Bailiang army would only be safe in the hands of Chen Jibao. He died 20 miles outside the West Shu Imperial City, lying on his sickbed. He did not talk about how to avenge his family, but pulled Su Xiao's hand and said that he had to remove the word righteous from Chen Jibao's identity as his adopted son so that he could die in peace. Sweet Potato did not dare to ask further. Su Fengnian stood up and put the spring and autumn back into its sheath on his back. He spat out a mouthful of scarlet and golden qi and said with a smile, "It's a blessing in disguise. I absorbed 2 Diana golden elixirs outside the city and opened another aperture. Also, do you know that this newly forged sword can become a flying sword by itself if it drinks more than 1,000 blood? Sweet Potato blinked and said, then can I borrow your servant to kill another 700 to 800 people? Su Fengyin reached out and flicked her forehead. He laughed angrily and said, do you think that this sword, which has the potential to be one of the top 3 swords in the world, is an idiot? You have to be of the same mind. When it comes to raising a sword, you can't be careless and there's no shortcut. Su Fengyin looked at the river of blood outside the palace and sighed. He silently scolded himself for being soft-hearted, hypocritical, and pretending to be obedient after receiving benefits. She picked up her suitcase and walked into the palace. Sweet Potato naturally had to stay behind to clean up the mess. She looked at his back and remembered that day in the palace. She was wearing a dragon robe and sitting on the dragon chair. That moment of joy was worth a lifetime. Only now did she know that choosing to spend the rest of her life in a lonely city like her aunt and turning white for a man was not such a terrible thing. Su Fengyin suddenly turned around and smiled. Sweet Potato was absent-minded for a moment. She did not know which lucky woman he would fall in love with in this life. Jiang and I? From the bottom of her heart, Sweet Potato did not like this subjugated princess who lived only for revenge. She felt that only a more generous woman was worthy of the young master's love. Of course, this was only what Sweet Potato thought. As for the young master's choice, she would support it. Su Fengyin was no longer His Royal Highness who could not distinguish between the 5 grains and the 4 limbs. He bathed alone in Xianxia and changed his clothes. After changing into a clean set of clothes, he felt refreshed. The situation in Dunhuang had been settled. The palace maids and eunuchs in each palace continued to behave themselves step by step. To them, the turbulent situation outside the palace was nothing more than the rise and fall of a new emperor. It was just the rise and fall of a new emperor. Their official hat became bigger or even their heads were taken off. It would not disturb the lives of small fish and shrimps like them. However, to be honest, they still liked the current palace lord as the master of Dunhuang. Although the rewards and punishments were clear, compared to the previous palace lord who had been as cold as an iceberg for decades, it was more humane. Su Fengyin sat on a stone bench in the courtyard. There were spring and autumn and spring thunder on the table. Just by listening to their names, they seemed to be a pair of siblings. Su Fengyin did not wait for the expected Sweet Potato. Instead, he was unexpectedly visited alone by Su Pu. Su Pu also did not need to kneel to make her position clear. When she saw Su Fengyin waving his hand to signal her, she calmly sat down and said, according to Li Yishan's arrangement, the visiting forces will be treated differently. The deep-rooted local parties in the city will be eradicated. None will be left alive. For those who have infiltrated Dunhuang from outside the city in the past 10 years, such as the 2 trusted aides of Jiuzi Province and Jinxi Province, after the old forces have been emptied and leveled, they will continue to arrange for people to fill in. Moreover, New Dunhuang City will take the initiative to express goodwill. Not only will it give them a way out, it will also set up a ladder to let them annex some of the Mao and Lu families' territories. In this way they will have a fat bait to slowly nibble away at. It is guaranteed that they will live in peace for 5 years. Su Fengyin nodded and curiously asked, what is the attitude of the Imperial Mending Platform? When she was not killing people, Su Pu, who was exceptionally refined like a down-and-out scholar, laughed softly and said, not declaring their position is the best attitude. New Dunhuang City is happy to share a cup of the soup with them. Su Fengyin asked, which forces are actually Beiliang's secret chess pieces? Without the slightest hesitation, Su Pu said, the Yuan and Duanmu families were single-handedly supported by Li Yishan. However, I am afraid that even within these 2 families, only 4 or 5 people know the truth. The rest of the forces are all acting because of the matter, because of the benefits they are not worth mentioning. With a wry smile, Su Fengyin said, by making such a scene, won't I create unnecessary problems for Shifu? Su Pu smiled sincerely and said, Li Yishan himself often says that it is because of the will of the people that he made the chess pieces outside the chessboard. From this, one can see the true strength of a national chess player. His Royal Highness need not worry. This general believes that Li Yishan will be happy to see this happen. To be able to make a chess game even more lively, it can be seen that His Highness has truly entered the game and exerted his strength. This is a good thing. Su Fengyin said with interest, Uncle Su is also proficient in chess? Su Pu hurriedly waved her hand and said, after interacting with Li Yishan for so long, he only knows how to talk about grand principles. If we were to really play a game, he would be an unbearably vulgar and terrible chess player. He would never be able to win against His Highness. Your Highness, please don't force me. Su Fengyin laughed and said, I think he is still a bit better than Su Xiao. One respectfully addressed his Royal Highness, while the other warmly addressed him as Uncle Su. Was it because they were incongruous? Suddenly the bitter rain of late spring poured down. Su Fengyin and Su Pu walked into the temple together. Su Fengyin said, when the devil Luo Yang enters the city, that will be the real calamity for Dunhuang City. Su Pu nodded his head. Even this light cavalry governor was a little worried. Su Fengyin said in self-mockery, don't jinx it. Inside and outside the city, the rain was pouring down. A man in white clothes went past the Kaji Buddha cave and slowly walked toward the city of Dunhuang. The heavy rain during the day was like a black curtain. The man's white clothes were particularly conspicuous. The raindrops evaporated about 1 zhang away from his head. Some of the fleeing Mao family's Jianghu cavalry saw this handsome bodhisattva on the road. Their hearts were filled with evil intentions, but they didn't even have time to make a sound before they were chopped into 8 pieces in the heavy rain. Chapter 549. There were several plump banana trees planted in the courtyard. The sound of the raindrops hitting the banana leaves was crisp and clear. Su Fengyin and Su Pu, who had met in a foreign land, took 2 stools and sat at the door. Su Fengyin suddenly smiled and saw Su Pu's puzzled gaze. He blushed with shame and said, Uncle Su should also know that I used to spend money to buy poems. I remember once I spent around 200 to 300 taels of silver to buy a 7-word quatrain. There was a line in it, the rain beats the banana leaves, the voice is bitter. At that time, I felt that it was quite interesting and took it to second sister to present it as a treasure. Unexpectedly, I was scolded badly and said that it was a groundless moan. I came up with an idea on the spur of the moment and changed it to the rain beats the banana leaves, the voice is heavy. Second sister was still not satisfied with it. I was angry and broke the pot, saying that, the rain beats the banana leaves, the voice is bitter. I asked her how the poem was. I didn't expect that after second sister beat me up, she would open her mouth and say that it was not bad. Su Pu did not understand the essence of the 3 layers of the word, pa at first, so she was somewhat puzzled. After a while, she smiled and squinted at the gloomy curtain of rain. She softly said, it's not bad. Su Fengyin was about to speak when Sweet Potato walked into the courtyard with a satin-embroidered umbrella. She closed the umbrella and stood upside down at the door. Su Fengyin remembered his mother's teachings when he was young. The umbrella should not be placed upside down, so he turned the small umbrella upside down. Sweet Potato smiled and said in a gentle voice, it's more or less settled. Although it can't be said that everyone is happy, the general direction has been settled. The minor details will be left to them to discuss in private when they return to the mansion. In any case, there are only a few pieces of meat on the chopping board. After all, it's just a matter of whose bowl it will land in. This servant guesses that it will be necessary to rely on the marriage of women of suitable age in the family. Only when everyone becomes in-laws will they be relieved. These 2 days there will be a few white matters and a few red matters. Everyone will be busy. Su Pu dismissed it with a smile. Su Fengyin looked at the sky and asked, do you want to go out for a walk? Su Pu smiled and said, that's a good idea. If you're tired, you can rest at this general's place. There's also a few bottles of green ant wine that you can't bear to drink. Warm it up and down. It'll drive away the cold. Sweet Potato looked worried. Su Fengyin smiled helplessly and said, do you really think I'm a clay bodhisattva or a paper tiger, so delicate that I can't bear to see rain? Hearing this, Sweet Potato no longer insisted on his opinion. The 3 of them walked out of Qingqiuzhai with their umbrellas swaying in the wind, and out of the giant Immortal palace that had returned to its former tranquility. Su Pu's wine shop was on the main road of the main city, so they could walk straight there. The heavy rain washed away the blood and conspiracies. However, the city was much stricter than usual. There were already several cases where the remnants of the rebellion, escorted by their loyal servants, disguised themselves and tried to escape the city. However, the Jianghu guards and Jianghu people who were temporarily stationed at the 3 city gates saw through their identities and killed them on the spot. As for whether there were any fish that escaped the net, only heaven knows. Perhaps only those who had endured hardships for years would know. This was another story similar to the joys and sorrows of this old man's son Zhao and the crown prince of Western Shu. Moreover, this thick blood debt would most likely be forced onto Su Fengyin's head in the future. At this time, the 3 of them were walking on the dim street with few people. Su Fengyin turned into a spacious alley and finally heard some noise. Su Fengyin stood in front of a scallion pancake stall with a large oil umbrella. This time-honored stall had been selling scallion pancakes in Dunhuang for decades, so it was not afraid of the dark alleys. Even at this time, there were still gluttonous diners coming to buy scallion pancakes and wolfing them down or bringing them to their families. Su Fengnian and the others stood at the end of the line. During this time there were also some commoners who came. Some of them knew Su Pu, who had been selling wine for some years. They knew that he had once married a beautiful daughter-in-law of a noble surname and then ran off to live with the eldest son of the Duanmu family. They all smiled and quietly pointed at this middle-aged man. Among them, a fat and wealthy merchant asked Su Pu, who had excellent calligraphy skills, for a spring festival couplet. Remembering their old friendship, he was somewhat dissatisfied. He stopped those familiar diners from making fun of him and cut the line to greet Su Pu. Su Pu turned around and smiled. "Boss Chow, did you buy scallion pancakes for your precious daughter again? Be careful that you don't grow too fat and won't be able to get married in the future." The fat merchant laughed and said, "My daughter didn't grow fat from eating. She looks like me. It doesn't matter if she won't be able to get married. It's fine as long as she marries into the family. Old Chow, I wake up early in the morning and grope around in the dark to earn money. What am I trying to do? Isn't it because I want my children's lives to be a bit more relaxed? That's right, Brother Su, I've purchased a new house in the eastern part of the city. When I get back I'll need a few couplets from you. Can you help me write some bolder couplets?" Su Pu nodded and said, "That's not a problem. Remember to come and drink often. Without Big Boss Chow's support, the wine shop won't be able to continue." The Chow family member patted Su Pu's shoulder and said straightforwardly, "That's not a problem. It just so happens that we're having a housewarming celebration. Originally, I wanted to go over to your place to discuss it. I'll buy all the wine from your shop. Is it good? But let's make it clear you have to give me, Old Chow, an affordable price." Su Pu nodded and said with a smile, "Boss Chow is an expert. If I dare to sell it at a high price, I won't be able to do business in Dunhuang City in the future." Chapter 550. Sweet Potato stood with an umbrella in hand. He turned his head to look at the middle-aged man and old man chatting politely with some interest. Su Fengnian turned around and saw that the merchant had probably noticed that he was dressed in bright clothes and had brought along a beautiful maidservant. The merchant had a bashful attitude as if he wanted to get close to Su Fengnian but did not dare to act rashly. Su Fengnian took the initiative to smile and said, "Is this Boss Chow? I am Uncle Su's distant nephew. I just came to Dunhuang to do some porcelain business. Uncle Su often says that Boss Chow has been taking care of the shop all these years. Later on, when we move in, I have some porcelain bowls and plates on hand. They can be considered presentable. When we visit, I will send over a dozen sets to Boss Chow." Boss Chow's face was filled with surprise. "Really?" Su Fengnian smiled warmly. "If I were to fool Boss Chow, I would be scolded to death by Uncle Su. I'm serious." Boss Chow's family was well off. It was not that he really cared about the dozen sets of porcelain bowls and plates. It was just that he saw the astonishing aura of this master and maidservant pair. If one wanted to make money in business, one had to first rely on capital and then rely on one's connections. Especially the latter. Those who had done business before knew that many times in this world where people looked down on others, if the bodhisattvas in the temples felt that your status was low and were ashamed to be associated with you, then no matter how much gold and silver you had, it would be useless. You would not even be able to enter the temple with a pig's head. Meeting an influential person who was easy to talk to was even more unprecedented than meeting a young courtesan in a brothel. The reason why Boss Chow got close to Su Pu, this kind of poor scholar, was because he had some small calculations in his heart. He was born a merchant and had a natural sense of inferiority towards those scholars who had knowledge in their stomachs. It was not easy for him to meet someone who was poor, so he always felt a little complacent. He wanted to show off his family's rich and dignified style by inviting Su Pu to write spring couplets and drink in his mansion. When did he not have the small idea of making Su Pu feel inferior when he saw the mansion? After Sweet Potato bought 3 scallion pancakes wrapped in oil paper, Su Fengnian and Su Pu bid farewell to Boss Chow and left. At that time, the fat man did not dare to look at Sweet Potato. Now that he had the time, he stared at her graceful figure with all his might. He swallowed hard, wondering how Su Pu could have such extravagant relatives. Walking on the bluestone pavement in the spring rain, Sweet Potato smiled and said, "Governor, it won't be long before the Yuan family will regret." Su Pu shook her head with a bitter smile. Su Fengnian asked, "What happened?" Sweet Potato glanced at Su Pu, who smiled and said, "Just say it." Sweet Potato then slowly said, "Once, there was a woman from the Yuan family with exceptional insight who took a fancy to you. She did not hesitate to elope and break off relations with her family. She married you and became the proprietress of a wine vendor. Later, for some reason, she returned to her family. Su Pu said calmly. She remarried to the eldest son of the Duanmu family. Don't blame her. How many women would be willing to grow old with a man who does not make progress? To be honest, when she was willing to accompany a poor scholar like me for daily necessities, I already had a whole new level of respect for her. All these years, I've always felt guilty, feeling that I owed her too much. How many young men and women who are not of equal status can truly grow old together? Even if there are, most of them are just stories in novels about gifted scholars and beautiful women. Besides, the men in the novels have to be top scorers in high school. Only then can they hold their heads high. For someone like Su Pu, who squandered a dowry of 100 taels of gold, according to common sense, there is no way she can be a man in the novels. Su Fengnian smiled gently and said, these women seem to be able to sing and weep, but in the end they have misjudged the men and misidentified themselves. When they were rich and leisurely, they were ignorant of worldly affairs. On one hand, their family was well off, so they could look down on those beautiful clothes, beautiful horses, rouge and sandalwood beds. However, when they really suffered with men, they gradually understood the power of the yellow and white vulgar things. Not to mention other things, when chatting with close friends in the boudoir, they would always hear them talking about exotic delicacies, how the newest clothes were not enough to wear, how the pearls, jade and gold hairpins were old-fashioned. Perhaps the women who fell from the branch to become sparrows did not really seek such enjoyment, but they always felt uncomfortable in their hearts. As time passed, they were subtly influenced. When they looked at the good-for-nothing man beside them, they knew that his literary talent could not turn into a wife who relied on her husband's status as a wife, and even implicated her children to suffer in the future. Naturally, their thoughts changed. Uncle Su, if my guess is correct, at first when she went to see her old friends, she would talk about it with you and would even joke about it? After a few years, she became more and more taciturn, and then she would throw some inexplicable tantrums with you. In the end, she simply did not talk to you about these things, right? Su Pu was stunned. Obviously she was hit by this young man's words. Uncle Su, it is reasonable for you to feel guilty, no one would dare to say anything bad about you. But if you feel too guilty, you will sink into it and you will be somewhat petty. Taking 10,000 steps back, that woman has married into a good family. Compared to feeling remorse and feeling sorry for herself, it is much more satisfactory. If you really want to blame someone, blame my Shifu. If he gave you the position of Duanhuang's general, you would not have so many troubles. Su Pu was stunned for a long time. She did not say anything. Sweet Potato sighed softly. If that woman heard what young master said, she would be too ashamed to show her face. Su Fengnian laughed self-deprecatingly. I have always been this kind of vulgar man who spoils the scenery. She probably would not be willing to dirty her ears, so she would not listen to even half a sentence. The middle-aged scholarly general from the spring and autumn period sighed. Your Highness' seemingly heartless words have helped Su Pu untie too much of the knot in my heart. Su Pu immediately laughed. Later on, drink a few jars of green ant wine and give Li Yishan a good scolding. The three of them went to the small wine shop at the entrance of the city gate. At this time, the man in white entered the city. There were dozens of corpses outside the city gate. They met on a narrow path. Su Pu looked at the man in white from afar and sucked in a breath of cold air, saying in a deep voice, Demon Luo Yang. Chapter 551. A 9,000-word chapter. On the day of the palace coup, it could be said that there were some families who were happy and some who were sad. The Mao and Lu families were annihilated in an instant. In the northeast part of the city, influential officials gathered together. Many families who could shake the entire city with a stomp of their feet could be considered neighbors. Perhaps through a wall, they could see the scene of the confiscation of property next door. The Mao family's mansion was sandwiched between the Yuan and Duanmu families. The young men of the latter two families were watching the excitement from the top of their respective tall buildings. Some of them could not hide their schadenfreude. They could vaguely see that in the majestic heavy rain, several white-faced, beardless old eunuchs led a vast number of Jianghu guards into the Mao family's mansion. The adult men, regardless of whether they resisted or surrendered, were all hacked to death. Some men with martial arts skills wanted to jump over the wall to escape, but they had already been easily intercepted and killed by the Wuling grasslands squatting at the base of the wall. Occasionally, there were a few people who relied on their thick skin and high martial arts skills to jump over the high wall. As soon as they landed, they were stabbed by the two families' elite retainers who were waiting for them. They were nailed to death to the ground or to the wall, or they were shot into hedgehogs by the rows of crossbows. Several of the Mao family's young men, who were regarded as thorns in the eyes of the two families' young men, were also quite unyielding. They led their men of sacrifice and vowed to fight to the death. Even some of the young women who usually did not reveal themselves, also took out their swords. However, they were unable to withstand the tide-like offensive and were all strangled on the spot. The Mao family, who had 500 armored cavalry, was originally one of the best in Dunhuang City. Even the odd-job workers and servants did not look at the ground when they walked. Each and every one of them had their eyes above the top of their heads. At this time, most of them died miserably. How could this not make the two families' men, who were watching the excitement with cold eyes, feel relieved? Some of the men who only dared to secretly covet the Mao family's women and covet the Mao family's daughter-in-law, felt a bit of pity. These beautiful women, who usually put on airs, would be a wonderful thing if they were sent to serve as prostitutes in the army. They did not mind spending hundreds of taels of silver in one night. The large clans of Dunhuang City were influenced by the nobles of the Central Plains, and many of them had private libraries. Perhaps because the Yuan clan had a literary background, they paid special attention to the family's private libraries. The old scholars and teachers were all famous scholars in the Tangerine and Jinxi prefectures. In the northern Mang, picking a martial artist with some skills was as easy as picking a cabbage. However, picking a scholar with real talent was like looking for a three-legged toad. The Yuan clan's expenditure in this area far exceeded that of their peers. This was attributed to the fact that the Yuan clan's leader was a scholar who had read a lot. The private library, Wenhui building, had a collection of 80,000 books. Most of them were plundered by scholars who had rushed to the north. Yuan Liang had always been immensely proud of this, and he especially looked for a seal master to carve a piece of yellow stone. He called himself the 80,000 old man. Today, Yuan Liang personally led nearly 100 soldiers and generals to the outside of the giant Immortal Palace. When he returned, he rewarded them according to their merits. At the same time, he ordered the steward to lead a group of trusted men of sacrifice through a secret passage that connected the three families. He first picked up a few women who had married into the Mao family so that they would not be implicated. Then he sealed the passage and destroyed it. The reason why he saved them in the chaos was not because Yuan Liang was merciful. It was because he wanted to take over the Mao family's property in the future. He had to rely on these astute women who were familiar with the Mao family. In fact, he did not have good intentions in the beginning of the marriage. Of course, it was the same for those women who had married into the Mao family. In the past, Yuan Liang treated these fierce women, his daughters-in-law, and even his granddaughters-in-law with respect. He would often reprimand his family's descendants in front of them. But after today, he wanted to see if they would still dare to order their husband around, and if they would still dare to forbid him from taking concubines. At this moment, perhaps she was already kneeling on the ground, sobbing and begging for mercy. Yuan Liang sat on a small couch near the window on the top floor of the Wenhui building, leisurely sipping tea, smiling as he looked at the upheaval in the Mao family mansion. He was in an extremely good mood. Different from Mao Ro, who has a perfume fetish, he likes to drink tea. On the small couch there was a large tea table with a tea set, tea grinder, and a soup bottle on it. After Yuan Liang caught a glimpse, he narrowed his eyes, but immediately put on a warm smile that made people feel good about him. He got off the couch and put on his shoes to welcome him, calling Brother Chong Yang. The latter waved his hand and casually sat down on the couch, taking a tea towel to wipe his cheeks. Yuan Liang laughed happily and said, "Duanmu Chong Yang, you scoundrel, the elegance in the room has been washed away by your vulgarity, how unlucky. Uncle Yuan, if you continue to be so merciless, be careful that I don't harm your granddaughter. She's very pretty to my taste." The man giggled, drinking a cup of tea to quench his thirst. It was indeed unbearably vulgar. This man called Duanmu Chongyang was the second young master of the Duanmu clan. His status was similar to Yuan Duan's, but his personality was the complete opposite. He stood up at 30 and started a family. Even now, he still hadn't taken any shape, causing his father, Duanmu Qingxing, to have a lot of white hair. Duanmu Chongyang was a renowned swordsman on the border between the two provinces. He often went to kill horse bandits for fun. As he killed, he actually became sworn brothers with the leader of a large group of horse bandits. If it weren't for his clan stopping him, he would have abducted his sister and made her the wife of the head of the horse bandits. Duanmu Chongyang was also the only one who dared to teach the Mao family's children a lesson when the Mao family was at its peak. The three families were neighbors. Close neighbors were better than distant relatives. Plus, they were in-laws, so on the surface they were harmonious. Duanmu Chongyang, Yuan Duan, Mao Chong and Mao Ro were childhood playmates. However, they had been estranged from Yuan Duan in recent years, intentionally or otherwise. In their youth, These two top young masters in Dunhuang liked to follow Mao Chong around as minions. It was a pity that Mao Chong died early. He didn't even reach 20 years of age before he died. Duanmu Qingxing had endured for a long time. Seeing that his eldest son was still frivolous, he finally couldn't help but slam the table angrily. Why did you go to the Mao family? Did that widow Mao Chong steal your soul? You're just a broken shoe. Don't you feel ashamed? You've ruined the plans of two families. What are you going to use to compensate? Yuan Duan narrowed his eyes again and lowered his head to taste his tea. Yuan Liang kept smiling but didn't say anything. Duanmu Chongyang raised his eyebrows and argued with his father. What's the big deal? Are two families hiding behind our master's back to scheme for benefits is a big deal? Aren't we afraid of incurring the suspicion of that little woman Yanji? In my opinion, this time we're dividing up the territories of the Mao and Lu families and Tao Yong. We shouldn't be so aggressive just because we protected the emperor. Do you really think we protected the emperor? Isn't this a trap that master set up long ago? He's waiting for those old foxes to jump into the fire pit. Besides, if we really want to argue, it's the young man who blocked the city gate with his sword who did the most work. I didn't hear him clamoring for a reward. He can't just do that behind closed doors with Yanji, right? Why didn't I see him take the position of commander of the Jianghu guards? This is a two-man show they're purposely putting on for us to see. They're warning us not to push our luck. Father, if you don't go to the Mao family and cause a ruckus, I'd like to see if you'll get a stomachache from eating the meat in your mouth. Duanmu Qingxing looked like he was going to pick up the jade-like Dongyue Celadon cup and smash it at this bastard of a son full of nonsense. Yuan Liang hurriedly stopped him and pulled on his in-law's arm. He joked, don't throw it, don't throw it. This kid isn't afraid of pain, but my heart aches for the cup. Duanmu Qingxing huffed, Brother Yuan, listen to this brat. What do you mean by arrogant? Does he think I'm a dog? Yuan Duan held an exquisite tea broom. He bent over and lowered his head. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he narrowed his eyes and sneered. After Duanmu Qingxing calmed down, Yuan Liang looked at the green and tea-colored Dongyue porcelain. He stroked his beard and said with a faint smile, Actually, Chongyang's words aren't without reason. Our table manners aren't too good. It's hard to avoid being disliked. Our two families are Bailiang's chess pieces that can't see the light of day. Misfortune and fortune are interdependent. Indeed, we don't have to worry about that little girl with a strange background mistreating us. We can eat less on the surface, but there's no harm in taking more in secret. This way, it'll be convenient for giant Immortal Palace to appease the people. To put it bluntly, don't think the word dog is unpleasant to hear. Our two families are just other people's running dogs. Before biting, we have to tuck our tails between our legs and not make a sound. When it's time to bite, we have to be full of energy. Duanmu Qingxing's face was full of anger. He was a rough man who brandished his spear and brandished his staff. He couldn't speak in a genteel manner. He really couldn't think of a rebuttal and could only sulk. Duanmu Chongyang, on the other hand, laughed loudly. Uncle's words are truly incisive. Yuan Liang said with a smile, Then let's set the tone like this. Eat less, eat more, and take it slow? In-law, why don't you and I spit out a few pieces of meat first? Duanmu Qingxing hesitated. He turned his head and caught a glimpse of that bastard who was the butt of jokes in the city casually slipping a teacup into his sleeve. He couldn't vent his anger, but it wasn't good for him to point it out. He could only nod and say in a low, muffled voice, In any case, it's all up to you these past few years. After absent-mindedly drinking his tea, Duanmu Qingxing practically dragged his son out of the tea-house and library. Yuan Duan was about to speak when the carefree Duanmu Chongyang jogged in, smiling as he took away the straw raincoat hanging on the screen. Yuan Liang waited until the sound of footsteps was far away before he glanced at the tea table. The tea set was missing a young gentleman's incomplete tea set. The entire set was ruined. He sighed softly. Chapter 552. Yuan Liang was no longer in the mood to drink tea, only feeling annoyed. He gazed at the curtain of rain outside the window and asked, Do you know that trash called Su Pu is the new big shot of Dunhuang? Yuan Dun put on a fake smile. I already know. Yuan Liang asked, Now that you know his identity, do you know how to get along? Yuan Dun said with a dark expression, At worst, we'll just remarry that shameless slut back. Duanmu Zhongqiu is a useless piece of trash who only knows how to read books and fiddle with literary talent. Just look at that pair of dogs and everything will be fine. I heard that Duanmu Zhongqiu has taken a fancy to a prostitute and wants to take her in as a concubine. Then we'll have that slut pretend to be jealous and divorce her under the title of a jealous woman. It'll be perfectly justifiable. Anyway, that good-for-nothing Su Pu won't mind this kind of thing. Yuan Liang was furious. He picked up the teacup and smashed it over. Yuan Dun, whose forehead was bleeding, was stunned. Yuan Liang scolded, "Idiot, do you really think Su Pu is just a brute? Which of Bailiang's loyalists are mediocre? Even if they're not smart enough and there's someone else in Bailiang plotting behind the scenes, do you think our Yuan family can afford to provoke that terrifying plague god Su Pu?" Yuan Dun held his forehead, blood seeping out from between his fingers. He said stubbornly, "How is it bad that I found his woman?" Yuan Liang was even angrier. He picked up the teacup and was about to smash it again, but seeing his eldest son's resolute gaze, he sighed dejectedly. Why are you so straightforward? A woman's mind is hard to predict since ancient times. Your sister has always been unyielding. After being humiliated like this and being forced to remarry, do you really think she won't go crazy and complain to Su Pu in a fit of rage? Since ancient times, how many of the generals and ministers who didn't die on the battlefield died in the gusts of cold wind on the king's pillow? Don't mention this again. Yuan Dun narrowed his eyes out of habit. After releasing his hand, he picked up a tea towel to wipe it clean and smiled. "I have a plan to divert the trouble to the Duanmu family." Yuan Liang's eyes lit up. He said skeptically, "Oh?" Yuan Duan rubbed the round teapot with his finger and said with a smile, "I have a confidant who is close to Duanmu Xianxia and can encourage him to take a concubine. Duanmu Xianxia is a hypocrite with a timid and fickle personality. He is easily swayed and cares about face the most. This confidant can take advantage of his lack of business knowledge and has a dead debt in his hands. 600 or 700 taels of silver should have been Duanmu Xianxia's money. Returning it to him now will leave him with plenty of money. When a man suddenly has a sizable private stash, he will have devious thoughts even if he doesn't have devious thoughts. I will have my confidant work on two fronts, one going to the brothels and beating around the bush. Now that the Duanmu family is suppressing the Mao family with us, I think the brothels are also aware of the pros and cons. On the other hand, he will bewitch Duanmu Xianxia, saying that Su Pu holds a grudge. If he dares to take that slut, he will make an example out of the entire Duanmu family. The Mao family is a good example. Father, do you think this good-for-nothing will give a divorce letter with both hands? At that time, our Yuan family will comfort that shameless slut, but she will fall out with the Duanmu family and shed all pretense of cordiality. Who will be the strongest power in Dunhuang City in the future? Yuan Liang thought about it carefully weighing the pros and cons and considering the feasibility of the plan. His smile grew wider and wider. Outside the building, the father and son of the Duanmu family walked further and further away toward the backyard. They got into an inconspicuous carriage, the sound of hooves not louder than the sound of the rain. Putting away the sheepskin umbrella, Duanmu Qingxing closed his eyes to rest. Duanmu Chongyang, who hadn't taken off his straw raincoat, also didn't have the least bit of a sloppy appearance. Duanmu Chongyang lifted the curtain and glanced at the high wall. He smiled and said, "If nothing unexpected happens, this pretentious and feminine father and son are starting to scheme against our Duanmu family. Their falling out is much faster than them flipping a book. Yuan Duan, this kid has a belly full of evil tricks since he was young. He thinks he's virtuous, but he still thinks no one can see through him. It's really funny." Duanmu Qingxing said in a low voice, "Chongyang, how do you think they're scheming?" Duanmu Chongyang sneered and said, "Putting yourself in their shoes, they'll definitely start from big brother and sister-in-law. They'll see immediate results. The Yuan family only has this bit of foresight and prospects." Duanmu Qingxing opened his eyes and crossed his fingers on his abdomen. He smiled faintly and said, "Your big brother is timid and afraid of trouble. He doesn't even have the guts to compete with you for the position of the family head. I've already given up on him. But you back then, dared to single-handedly kill Mao Chong in one move. Your hands and feet are clean too. This time, Yuan Liang and Yuan Duan want to trap your big brother. You go and keep an eye on them. Just don't make a big fuss. There's no need to lower yourself to their level. Otherwise, if they see through our concealment, it won't be pretty. We father and son are big men. Don't haggle over the smallest details with those two women. The Duanmu family has never treated Dunhuang as a place to do big things." Duanmu Chongyang laughed heartily and said mockingly, "This drinking of tea is just drinking the word harmony in harmony. Looking back at Yuan Liang's sinister methods these years, it's really a waste of several hundred caddies of tea." Duanmu Qingxing didn't go along with this topic. Instead, he said in a more serious tone, "Just now, you went to the Mao family to save them. There's even a hint of camaraderie. Very good. Your way of doing things these years has always been putting on a show for the masters of Bailiang. Now it's time to pick the ripe fruit. Father can give up everything, but I'll definitely let you become the great lieutenant of the Jianghu guards. You have to interact more with Su Pu and that young man. Drink and drink wine and so on. You must not be in a hurry. As long as you progress step by step, there will always be a chance for you to go to Beiliang and make a name for yourself. Dunhuang is still too small for you to show off your skills. Join the Beiliang army and strive to become the trusted aide of the hereditary heir apparent of the king of Beiliang. If this boy is not enough to entrust your life to, you can always switch to Qinjibao. It won't be bad either. But remember to use the trick of injuring yourself to gain the enemy's confidence. Otherwise, you'll be regarded as a rebellious minister. You won't have a chance to make a name for yourself in Beiliang. Leaning against the wall of the carriage, Duanmu Chongyang clicked his tongue and said, "The white-clothed war immortal Qinjibao, the ruthless man who slaughtered the spear immortal Wang Xiu. I've been looking forward to this for a long time." Duanmu Qingxing shook his head and said, "The struggle for military power between the Beiliang heir apparent and Qinjibao is not as one-sided as the outside world thinks. I feel that as long as Su Xiao is alive, Qinjibao won't rebel. But as long as Qinjibao doesn't rebel, as long as this drags on, the heir apparent will have more and more room to maneuver." Duanmu Chongyang was puzzled. "Su Xiao killed Qinjibao with one saber strike," he said. "Isn't everything easy? Although this way the morale of Beiliang's 300,000 armored cavalry will be reduced by half, but in the end, it's better to end the pain quickly than to prolong the pain." Duanmu Qingxing's expression was grave. He shook his head and said, "This is the brilliance of the king of Beiliang's art of controlling people. He knows that some people can't be killed, he knows how to nurture a tiger and invite calamity. In my opinion, Qinjibao was the most powerful Beiliang army in the world. It was the heir apparent who killed him, but Su Xiao couldn't be killed. Perhaps this vassal king with a different surname also couldn't bear to kill him." Duanmu Chongyang greatly treasured the time he spent alone with this old man, and even more treasured the opportunity for him to share his experiences. He asked, "Then father, do you feel that Qinjibao has really rebelled?" Duanmu Qingxing smiled and said, "Even if at the beginning he put on a show for the Zhao family's son to see and for Great Peace City to relax, in the long run, Qinjibao will be in a similar situation as his adoptive father after the Battle of the Western Wall. He had no choice but to rebel. However, at that time, Su Xiao had the willpower to have the glory and wealth he has today. If he had really rebelled, he would have spent 3 or 4 years ruling across the river with the Zhao family. In the end, he would have used up the hearts of the people, and without the support of the scholars and the people, he would only be in a circle and die. This is the great wisdom of a martial artist like Su Xiao. When one reaches a high position, it is very difficult to remain clear-headed. Qinjibao is different. If he rebelled, not only would the entire Liang dynasty be happy, Beimeng would also clap and cheer. Even Beiliang would most likely approve more than oppose." Duanmu Chongyang carefully added, "The precondition is that Su Xiao dies of old age." Duanmu Qingxing nodded and said, "That's right. So in reality Su Xiao and Qinjibao are both waiting. When the time comes when it is the Beiliang heir apparent's turn to put on the Liang prince's robe and personally go to play chess with Qinjibao, it will truly be a life and death battle. Before that, it will be a good time for you to wait for the best price." Duanmu Chongyang was in high spirits and eager to give it a try. Duanmu Chongyang came from an ordinary background. Not to mention his awkward status as a chess piece of Beiliang, he was only a small local clan compared to those colossal powers. Beimeng had 8 military officials in charge of military affairs. He had no relatives or friends. If there were no major wars, his climbing speed was destined to be slow. The Beimeng Southern dynasty, which had lost its scholars, was even more of a joke. The Beiliang army was undoubtedly the first choice. If the confrontation between Liang and Beimeng was like a jade wall, then why not take advantage of this opportunity to attack the Beiliang army in the crevice? Why didn't a real man bring a Wu Go and take half of the 50 provinces? Duanmu Chongyang suddenly frowned and said, "If one day the devil Luo Yang comes to Dunhuang, what should we do?" Duanmu Qingxing loosened his fingers and waved his hand, saying, "There is no need to worry unnecessarily." At that time, the old Castellan still wanted to go out of the city to fight even though he was seriously injured to death. It could be said that he used his life in exchange for a verbal agreement. This was all part of Beiliang's plan. They wanted to give Dunhuang a large bodhisattva to worship. Duanmu Chongyang's face was full of admiration. Beiliang Qinjibao and the devil Luo Yang both like to wear white clothes. Haha, when I am troubled, I go out to kill horse gang. I also like to wear a white robe. Duanmu Qingxing felt a little helpless, but his mood relaxed a little. He joked, "In white there is Luo Yang, in green there is West Chu Chao Changqing. You should strive to be more successful and get yourself a red robe or something." Duanmu Chongyang knew himself well. He shook his head and said, "I don't dare to think about it." Chapter 553. Even though there would always be ambitious and ruthless people emerging from every generation, each of them dominating the world for 100 years, and there were only so many colors such as white clothes, green clothes, red clothes, or purple clothes, there had never been such a white-clothed person in history. Wherever he went, he would kill gods and Buddhas that stood in his way. When he first came to the pugilistic world, no less than 1,000 people had died by his hands. Among them were the innocent commoners who had blocked his way. They might have only taken a second glance at him, but there were also heroic heroines who had rushed over to intercept him after hearing the news. However, this white-clothed devil did not stop his footsteps. He traveled through 8 provinces and finally killed his way to the northern Mang royal court. Along the way there was no lack of experts from the 10 great sects, such as a deputy mountain master of Mount Tibing. Even an old monk who was sweeping the caves of Tsaoji Buddha cave had appeared. There was even a Taoist who was a direct disciple of the Taoist sect. Killing people like flax, killing people without blinking. These 2 sayings couldn't be more suitable for the devil Luo Yang. Duanmu Chongyang suddenly said, "That little girl with naturally beautiful lips like rouge is actually quite suitable to be with Luo Yang. If they run into that young hero who repelled 500 riders by himself, there will be a good show to watch." Duanmu Qingxing frowned and said, "Why are you thinking about this nonsense?" Duanmu Chongyang smiled embarrassedly. Duanmu Qingxing sighed and said, "Yuan Liang and I are at most old foxes who have the ability to plot a city or a state. Compared to Su Xiao, the sky-swallowing python, we are far inferior." The old man continued, "It's not that I belittle myself. Su Xiao, just calling this name makes me tremble with fear." The carriage stopped slowly. Duanmu and Duanmu, who were much more scheming than Yuan and his son, got off the carriage together. Duanmu Chongyang walked with a straw raincoat. No matter how you looked at him, he looked like a loafer who was waiting to die. He walked in front of his father without any rules and strode into the mansion. Duanmu Qingxing, who was walking with an umbrella, said to himself, "The night air is clear and bright. Ask yourself, you will know how much conscience you have and how much knowledge you have." He stepped over the threshold with a self-mocking face. Unfortunately, it's daytime. On this day it was still raining heavily. Bai Yi had just entered the city when he met a group of 3 people who were walking towards the wine shop. Su Pu, who had lived in seclusion in Dunhuang City for many years, stood in front of the 2 men. It was a taboo in Jianghu for a pair of unfamiliar experts to meet each other. However, Su Pu didn't care about this. It was ridiculous to say that he had submitted to the junior Su Fengyan. Su Pu, as the commander of the 12 light cavalry camps, had 70 to 80,000 cavalry under his command. He was on equal footing with the vanguard commander Wuxia. Not to mention Li Yishan, his confidant, even Zhao Chongling, the undisputed chief strategist of Bailiang, respected Su Pu greatly. What kind of person had Su Pu not seen? However, Su Pu was strict in his conduct and abided by his duty. Since he was willing to be a death soldier pawn of Dunhuang City, and even His Royal Highness dared to go to Beimeng alone, he had the resolve to die in front of Su Fengyan in this city. There were countless elite troops in the world, but only the Northern Liang Army and Tuoba Bodhisattva's personal guards could be said to be able to fight to the death without leaving a single soldier. Su Pu considered himself an old soldier of Bailiang. How could he be afraid of battle? So what if you are the top person of the demonic path? How many times can you make me, Su Pu, die? Sweet Potato took a deep breath. He was about to take a step when he was pulled back by Su Fengyan. Bai Yi Luo Yang entered the city. She didn't look at Su Pu and Sweet Potato. She only looked meaningfully at Su Fengyan, who had changed his face. Su Fengyan walked out of the umbrella and grimaced as he walked in front of Su Pu. "So it is you. Actually, I should have thought of it long ago. I just didn't dare to believe it." The Northern Mang demonic path's most powerful and ruthless person stretched his waist and slowly walked over. He allowed the raindrops to smash against his clothes, completely revealing his slender figure that wasn't too curvaceous. He said, "Huang Baozhuang is finally dead." Su Fengyan stood where he was. He pursed his lips and didn't say anything. He just wanted to slap his own mouth. Who told you to jinx it? He regretted not bringing out Chuanxiu and Chunlei. The 2 were less than 20 steps apart. This was Sweet Potato's first time seeing this great demonic lord. He was already prepared to die. This was Su Pu's second time. At that time, the 2 kings of Dunhuang, Sweet Potato's aunt and Luo Yang, fought. He had watched from afar, but he couldn't see their faces clearly. However, Luo Yang's aura couldn't be faked by anyone, not even Tuoba. This white-clothed demon's murderous aura was one of a kind. It was one of a kind in Jianghu. Even though Luo Yang looked like a woman up close, Su Pu still didn't believe that he was a woman. Only Su Fengyin, who had suffered in the sword pavilion of Flying Fox City, knew that she was indeed a woman. She had both the appearance of a celestial being and the appearance of a dragon concubine. She was also very young. Damn it, her extraordinary talent was comparable to Li Chuangong's. Su Fengyin asked, "How did Huang Baozhuang die? Where's your pearl?" The woman who was both Luo Yang and Huang Baozhuang's chess and sword music school didn't answer. She just touched her stomach and said, "I'm hungry again." Su Fengyin knew that this crazy woman had said that she would kill people when she was hungry. Compared to the kind and innocent Huang Baozhuang, she was like heaven and earth. This well-deserved giant of the demonic path suddenly laughed. Even Su Pu was a little dazzled. She laughed softly and said, "Huang Baozhuang doesn't know what I did, but I know what she did." Sweet Potato and Su Pu didn't need to be in the rain. They were already confused. Chapter 554. Su Fengyin was about to speak when the woman who addressed herself as Luo Yang finally looked Sweet Potato and Su Pu in the eye. She frowned and said, "Why do you look so much like that old hag? No wonder your aunt wanted me to spare your life. I won't kill you, but go back to the palace of purple and gold. You're not allowed to set foot in Yeting Palace for the rest of your life." Sweet Potato smiled charmingly but didn't move. Luo Yang stepped behind Sweet Potato and gently patted her chest. Almost at the same time, Luo Yang's right hand turned into a slap to deflect Sweet Potato's kick. Her left hand caught Su Pu's whipped leg and threw him away. Su Fengyin didn't move, but his two flying swords were already out of his sleeves. However, when the golden threads were 2 inches away from Luo Yang's forehead, they stopped and trembled. The morning dew stopped 3 inches away from her chest. Sweet Potato and Su Pu were about to join forces and give Su Fengyin the opportunity to charge his flying swords. Suddenly the sky changed color and the rain fell like thousands of flying swords. The two of them suffered unspeakable pain just by blocking the swords. They only managed to advance a little after being cut by thousands of swords. Luo Yang was the youngest person to enter the realm of celestial phenomenon in the past 100 years. In this aspect she was even more shocking than Wang Xinji, Tuoba, and Dong Tai, who were in the top 3 of the martial arts role. Su Fengyin completely let go of his control over the two swords. He looked at the two of them calmly and then looked at the white-clothed devil Luo Yang. He shook his head and said, "Sweet Potato, Su Pu, you two go first. Don't worry about me." Sweet Potato was the first to turn around. Su Pu hesitated and also retreated. Luo Yang made an exception and didn't chase after them. Probably because he found the golden thread flying sword in front of him interesting, he stretched out 2 fingers and caught the falling golden flying sword. Ignoring the morning dew falling to the ground near his chest, he said, "Su, you have some skills and are becoming more and more promising. How did you enter the Vajra realm and how did you get injured?" Without any support, the morning dew fell straight to the ground and was covered by the endless rainwater pouring down from the trough. Without looking at Chao Lu and Jin Lu, Su Fengyin asked, "Do you have to kill me?" Luo Yang's fingers slightly exerted force, the golden thread curved in an arc. She said with a smile, "Give me a reason not to kill him. Tell me." "Forget it, you're going to die anyway. I'm more interested in knowing your true identity." Su Fengyin said bluntly, "Su Fengyin." Luo Yang said expressionlessly, "It's not as nice as Su Xianxia." Su Fengyin laughed. Without any guidance, the morning dew rose and stabbed toward the white-clothed demon's chest again. This attack was sufficiently sinister and tricky, and the timing was flawless. Even the blind zither player Xue Songguan would be caught unprepared. But she only made a small sound of surprise. She stretched out 2 fingers again and caught the strange psychic flying sword. Suddenly she said, "Wu family's secret sword nurturing technique. It seems your talent in the way of the sword isn't as good as your use of the blade. You have a total of 12 flying swords, but only this little thing has a complete sword embryo." Su Fengyin, who had been ridiculed for his talent for the first time, didn't jump up and curse. He stood quietly where he was. Su Pu and Sweet Potato, who had a tacit understanding, stopped and surrounded the white-clothed woman in a tripartite confrontation. The rain gradually stopped. There were no mountains here, so the mountains didn't turn green after the rain. Luo Yang asked, "I've heard that you're half a disciple of Li Chungang. But what's your relationship with Dong Tai? You'd better have some relationship." "I killed my way here because I wanted to send a message to this new sword immortal swordsman. I want to fight him." "Do you really think you're invincible?" Su Fengyin spat and laughed, "Give me back my Huang Baozhuang. Compared to a demon like you, I prefer that gentle girl." Luo Yang laughed, her killing intent overflowing. But it wasn't directed at the blabbermouth Su Fengyin, but at the man on the city wall who carried the nameless sword. She mocked, "No wonder you're so bold. So it was him who sent you a message." The dark clouds dispersed, and only a ray of sunlight shone through the cracks in the sky. It happened to shine on the swordsman's body. He looked like an immortal descending from the heavens. The middle-aged swordsman with a plain face floated down and said with a smile, "I did send a message to this kid, but my original words were for him to say, 'Do you think you're worthy of looking down on Dong Tai?'" Su Fengyin curled his lips. If it was Li Chungang, it would be more like it. Luo Yang flicked away 2 dispensable flying swords with her finger. She looked at the new champion swordsman of this generation who had just fought with Tuoba, her eyes burning. She stomped her foot. The rain on the street splashed up into countless flying swords. "You're the 3rd most powerful swordsman in the world, so I'll kill you with my flying swords. The reason I'm ranked behind you is because I haven't fought you yet. That's all." This was the conceit of the 4th most powerful person in the world, Luo Yang. Dong Tai didn't look at the thousands of flying swords with awe-inspiring sword intent. He glanced at Su Fengyin and said calmly, "In this battle, I owe Li Chungang the favor of lending me his sword and teaching me. Stand further away and watch carefully with your eyes closed." Watch carefully with his eyes closed? Outsiders might not understand, but Su Fengyin, who had just entered the Vajra realm, knew the meaning of this. Just like after the sword embryo was completed, controlling the sword with chi became useless. It was far inferior to controlling the sword with the will of the heart, which was why she couldn't kill him in one strike. It wasn't that the flying swords weren't sharp enough, but that Su Fengyin's mental state was still insufficient. If it were Dong Tai who was truly unparalleled in the art of killing, Luo Yang wouldn't have been able to do it so easily. If Dong Tai claimed to be the 2nd most powerful swordsman, no one would dare to claim to be the 1st. Even Li Chungang didn't deny this point. If Su Fengyin watched the battle with his eyes open, he would have to pick up sesame seeds and throw away watermelons. The gains wouldn't make up for the losses. After he closed his eyes, one of his 5 senses would disappear, but the other 4 senses would be imperceptibly strengthened. This was the same principle as how blind people tended to have better hearing and deaf people tended to have better eyesight. After letting Sweet Potato and Su Pu leave at ease, he skimmed along the street. After about half a mile, he sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. On this day, not only did the southern wall of Dunhuang City collapse, but the southern city where Su Fengyin sat was also destroyed. The final result of this battle was that the 3rd most powerful person was still the 3rd most powerful person, and the 4th most powerful person was still the 4th most powerful person. Chapter 555. When Su Fengyin opened his eyes, he only saw Dong Tai squatting by his side. There was no sign of the devil Luo Yang. Su Fengyin was shocked to see a pale face like a thin piece of golden paper. Dong Tai, carrying a nameless sword on his back, looked at the ravines and collapsed city walls. He said calmly, "After the battle with Tuoba, I didn't win or lose. I traveled east to the ruins of the 9 swords of the Wu family. Along the way, I saw the master of the Banbing Mountain, the bronze man from the chess and sword music school, and several devils. I fought each of them once. As for this Luo Yang who just defeated Hong Jingyan, I found her in the air a long time ago. This tag team battle started with Tuoba and ended with Luo Yang. I didn't come here in vain. You're unlucky. After entering the city, she didn't have any killing intent. After sensing my sword aura, she wanted to use you as bait to force me to show myself." Su Fengyin said with a smile, "Beimeng didn't do the right thing this time." The new sword deity without a donkey or a peach blossom branch stood in front of a ravine. "I split the water when I see the water, I split the mountain when I see the mountain. This is the way of the sword Li Chungang lent me. Even if the 9 people on the martial arts ranking were waiting in front, I wouldn't be able to take a detour. It might be a bit of a disappointment if I told other people about this, but since you came to Beimeng alone, you should be able to understand a little." Dong Tai seemed to know what Su Fengyin wanted to ask. He smiled warmly and said slowly, "Senior Li's sword split the mountain and the sky. I used my swordsmanship to seek the Tao and took a narrow path. Senior Li lent me his sword not because he wanted me to take his broad path, but because he showed me the scenery on that path. He didn't want me to change my path. This is the most valuable part. When I gave you the sword, I deliberately hid the secret of the 12 flying swords. Apart from wanting you to comprehend the Tao and cultivate on your own, it was also because I wasn't straightforward enough. If it were Senior Li, he wouldn't have been so shy." Su Fengyin nodded. Dong Tai turned his head and glanced at him with a smile in his eyes. "You're straightforward and not pretentious. No wonder Li Chungang thought so highly of you." Su Fengyin smiled shyly. Su Fengyan was a junior interacting with his relatives and elders was of course because they were relatives. That was a senior. Dong Tai was not a man who stood out from the crowd. He was middle-aged and always had a smile on his face. He was more like a good-tempered and easygoing neighbor uncle. He was even more elegant and dignified than Su Pu, who had been selling wine for many years. Especially when he didn't unsheath his sword and return to its original state, he was even more humble and amiable. Of course, Su Fengyan had also secretly imagined Dong Tai riding a donkey and shaking the peach blossoms. Amongst the green mountains and clear waters, or amidst the rain of arrows, he must have had the demeanor of an expert. Unfortunately, he didn't get to see it. Dong Tai looked at his chi and asked, "How did you get injured?" Su Fengyan said softly, "I fought with a few hundred cavalry. I was a little weak." Dong Tai teased, "You're the same as your father. You didn't know your place when you were young." To be honest, a few years ago, I had always felt that Su Xiao was not worthy of my sister and felt that it was not worth it for her. This time when I went to northern Mang I was stopped at the border. Su Xiao shamelessly caught me and forced me to drink. My impression of him changed a lot. Although I still don't understand why my sister eloped with him, I feel that at least she was happy and comfortable with a bumpkin like Su Xiao. Not to mention other things, Su Xiao only married her in his lifetime. It was already very rare, so there was nothing to feel sorry for. "Oh right, your gold-threaded sword embryo is more than half completed. It's a stone from another mountain to improve jade. I'm not curious. How did you obtain the morning sword by chance? Tell me about it." Su Fengyan turned around and pointed at the giant Immortal's palace complex. He smiled and said, "I was thinking about things on the roof the whole night. When the sun rose from the east and the first rays of the morning sun came from the east to the west and fell on me, I suddenly figured it out. It was also at that time that I realized that after every flying sword gained intelligence, it was a kind of secret sword technique." Dong Tai nodded and said softly, "That's why you can't talk about Tao with someone who doesn't have a root vessel. Your talent is not bad." Su Fengyan asked cautiously, "My eyes are bad. I didn't see whether there was a big disparity between you and Luo Yang." Dong Tai smiled and said, "There wasn't a big disparity. Luo Yang just defeated her martial brother from the chess and sword music school, Hong Jingyan. She came riding on the momentum. I, on the other hand, had to fight bitterly. Therefore, her 800 rain sword strikes all hit me solidly. Right now my 5 viscera and 6 bowels are not feeling well. However, since I have reached the land immortal realm in the eyes of the world, I can still withstand it. As for her, she only suffered 1 strike from me and broke the pearl in her heart. It can be considered 1 pearl for 1 life. Half of it was done on purpose and half of it was because she couldn't escape this calamity. Perhaps she wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by inviting me to a duel. If you have the guts, go and investigate it yourself." Su Fengyan shook his head straightforwardly and said, "I'm lucky that she didn't come looking for me. I won't dare to seek trouble for myself." Dong Tai looked at the sky and sighed softly, "That old man Wang Xianxia has been waiting for 60 years. We haven't been able to pull him down. Tuoba and Chao Changqing can't do it either. In the future it's up to you, Luo Yang, Nangong Puji and the other youngsters." Su Fengyan was surprised. Dong Tai didn't keep him in suspense and answered, "I want to look for people with special abilities in the Immortal Mountains overseas to sharpen my swordsmanship." Dong Tai smiled open-mindedly and said, "There are millions of swordsmen in the world. There should be a few who truly live for the sword and die for the sword. Maybe in the future, if I can't return to the Central Plains, I'll borrow a sword before I die. Otherwise the Jianghu will forget Dong Tai." Chapter 556. He then corrected himself, "It's okay to forget Dong Tai, but you can't forget Dong Tai's sword." Before Dong Tai left, he pointed at the ruins in front of him. Seeing Su Fengyan nod, he said, "Beimang's peaceful and blessed land has a foggy heavenly gate in the Tao Te sect. If you have the chance you must go and take a look." Dong Tai carried his sword and chanted softly, drifting into the distance. "A dream like a banana, a deer like a mayfly with a sword on its back climbing up the cliff." For the next 3 days, a young scholar could be seen at the southern gate, carefully examining every sword mark and every ravine. The whole of Dunhuang City did not have the heart to care about such trivial matters. After knowing that the devil Luo Yang entered the city and entered the Yeding Palace, almost 10,000 people fled in one night. Later, when they saw that Luo Yang did not indiscriminately kill the innocent and that the palace master of the Purple Gold Palace, Yanji, put out a notice to appease them, only then did 3,000 to 4,000 people return to the city. Other than the white-clothed Luo Yang, who had recently become the 4th person on the martial arts roll, the most talked about was the wine seller Su Pu, who had become the deputy governor of Dunhuang City and climbed to a high position that was second only to the two of them. Some said that this person was the former governor's male companion, while others said that he was a devil who had hidden very deeply. Some of the customers who had visited the shop were complacent and said that they had long seen through Su Pu's ability. As for Bosch Chiao, who had received a dozen sets of porcelain bowls and 5 or 6 spring festival couplets from the old eunuch, after a short period of trembling, he felt even more honored and his status skyrocketed. He had become the most popular merchant in the city. Su Fengyin was originally an outsider, so he did not care about worldly affairs. He only cared about the spearhead, looking for the swordsmanship formula from the thousands of scars and comparing it with the bladesmanship manual. He benefited a lot. When they left Dunhuang at noon, the southern part of the city was deserted, so he and Sweet Potato and Su Pu went to a wine stall on the eastern side of the city to drink before leaving. The stall owner was shallow but shrewd. He did not recognize the three of them and only thought that they were high-ranking officials and dignitaries in the city that he could not afford to offend. He did not dare to carelessly quote a high price for their drinks. The three of them sat at a table in the corner. The reason why Su Fengyin chose to leave the city at this time was because Sweet Potato's affairs were orderly. He had nothing to do if he stayed there. Furthermore, Luo Yang had only stayed in the Yeting Palace for 2 days before quietly leaving. Without this mortal enemy in the palace, Su Fengyin did not dare to lower his guard. Su Pu was in high spirits. He used his chopsticks to hit the porcelain bowl like a stone hammer and softly hummed a Bailiang Kori song. It was a minor tune that was suspected of being out of tune, but it was particularly warm to the ears. It was a farewell to Su Fengyin. Su Pu was not a blockhead who did not understand the ways of the world. He was the first to get up and bid farewell. Not long after, on the way back to the city, he saw a carriage pass by. The curtain lifted a corner, and outside the carriage, a man and a woman looked at each other. Their footsteps did not stop and the carriage did not stop. The sweet-tempered woman in the carriage was biting her lips, her cheeks filled with tears. Su Fengyin asked in a low voice, "It's her?" Sweet Potato laughed, "Isn't it? What a coincidence." Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "What coincidence? Someone arranged it. Of course it's not her intention." Sweet Potato laughed it off. She was not unfamiliar with the knack of it. It was just that once she said it out loud, even the slightest aftertaste would be gone. You see how charming Qingshan is, you expect Qingshan to be like this. This is called mutual affection. You see how charming Qingshan is, but Qingshan sees you as a pile of shit. This is called wishful thinking. Qingshan sees how charming you are, but you take a pile of shit on the mountain. You want Qingshan to treat you like the first time you met her. This is a person's heart is not enough. Sweet Potato took the initiative to change the topic. Why don't young master stay for a few more days? You can try to subdue Su Pu. Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "The thing I'm not good at in this life is buying people's hearts. This is the second time I'm traveling, and I didn't think about how to exchange pleasantries with the 100 light cavalry of the Phoenix Battalion. Besides, I can't stand those old tricks of kowtowing. Those who come out to mingle with officials and traverse the Jianghu are not fools. If they're lucky, they'll be able to hit it off and they'll be suitable to be friends. You see, when I was His Royal Highness, other than a few bad friends who grew up with me, have I ever taken in any underlings? It's fun to be stabbed in the back." Sweet Potato rubbed Su Fengyin's forehead and said softly, "This has to be changed." Su Fengyin nodded and said, "I'm changing it diligently. Su Pu said just now that Su Xiao is gathering momentum and I have to take advantage of it. It's very reasonable." After drinking a few bowls of wine, Su Fengyin got up and carried a new purple bamboo box. He said, "You don't have to send me off." Sweet Potato stood obediently in the same place and just stared blankly into the distance to send him off. Su Fengyin headed north toward Jinxi province. Before he reached the site of the Wu family's 9 swords defeating 10,000 cavalry, he encountered a huge land-based tornado that appeared out of nowhere. It was a magnificent sight. Su Fengyin fastened the string of the box and rushed over with a big laugh. He remembered the wooden sword of riding an ox on Mount Wudong and drawing a waterfall. The spring and autumn sword broke open a gap and penetrated the wall into the tornado. Generally speaking, land-based tornadoes were not as powerful as water-based tornadoes, but they were often mixed with sand and boulders, making them extremely dangerous. The land-based tornado sucked in the soil on a huge scale. After Su Fengyin entered, he had to suffer a lot. It was almost as if he was continuously being played by a blind female zither player. However, Su Fengyin was already mentally prepared. He pulled out the spring and autumn sword and used his sword chi to break apart the boulders. At the same time he built a mirage of the great yellow courtyard and stepped on it. It was as if he was climbing a tall building, as if he was climbing the 5 sacred mountains. He closed his eyes and focused his mind. He pulled out the sword again and again, rising higher and higher until he was thousands of feet above the ground. Suddenly the wind stopped and Su Fengyan rushed out. His figure rose above the sea of clouds as if he had entered the heavens. His whole body was bathed in the golden sunlight, like a golden Buddha. It was a pity that the world could not see this scene. Su Fengyan was above the 9 heavens. Looking at the vast golden sea of clouds, he laughed and said, "I have a sword called Fu Yao." He purposely inhaled and exhaled, and his body was sucked into the whirlpool. The spring and autumn sword continuously chopped. This time he was going against the flow downwards. The devil Luo Yang killed every immortal and Buddha she met. Dong Tai also said that Li Chuangong's way of swordsmanship was like meeting mountains and rivers. Su Fengyan did not believe that he could not chop a rootless land dragon. Although there were flying boulders like flying locusts and arrows, most of them were traceable. As he walked downwards, the boulders rolling on the jade plate became countless swift and fierce hidden weapons. Fortunately, Su Fengyan had personally experienced the dense killing caused by the blind lady Shuesongwan's zither controlling the raindrops. He walked to the middle of the land dragon with great difficulty. After taking a few breaths, he still felt that he could not withstand it. He gritted his teeth and held on for a while. Finally he stopped joking around with his life. He turned around and flew out of the mouth of the pot before falling back down. It was as if he was once again in the situation outside the gate of Dunhuang where the 500 cavalry took turns to attack. During this time he was scraped by the debris until he was covered in blood. Fortunately, he was still able to raise his sword when he was thrown out of the pot for the 3rd time. Since he had lost a lot of blood, he did not want to waste it. In this way, Su Fengyan followed the land tornado to the north. In the world, there were people who rode on horses or boats and drifted along with a tornado. It was not known if this was unprecedented. However, after entering Beimang and Flying Fox City, he heard that the Qilin Immortal of the Dao sect had once crossed a reed to reach the 13th peak, and Tuoba, who used the Arctic ice field as a place to temper his body and soul, had once stood on the whale-floating sea. Compared to these two, Su Fengyan was not too far behind. Everything has life and death. After the shabbily dressed Su Fengyan had cultivated 6 swords, he noticed that the tornado had begun to weaken. It was not as powerful as before, so he began to continuously slash at the air wall with his sword to accelerate the dissipation of the land tornado. After throwing out the tornado for the last time, Su Fengyan suddenly raised his qi and stood above the sea of clouds. He glanced at the setting sun in the west. The clouds and mist were purple, presenting a beautiful scene of purple smoke curling up in spirals. Su Fengyan was intoxicated. At that moment, a thought flashed across his mind. Had she, who was riding on a sword, seen such a scene before? Falling back to the human world, the spring and autumn sword was no longer as powerful as the original land tornado. Landing on the ground was not a problem, but Su Fengyan was still immersed in his thoughts. As a result, he was kicked to the ground. Although he was temporarily alert, he still could not avoid the sneak attack. Fortunately, that kick did not have the intention to kill. Su Fengyan was thrown a long distance away from the ground. The clothes on his body were completely torn. When he got up, he saw that it was the acquaintance he did not want to see the most in his life, the other Huang Baozhuang Luo Yang. In the dusk, on the yellow sand, a white dress fluttered. Su Fengyan felt a headache coming on. Even when he encountered Tuoba Chun's son and the blind female zither player, these two formidable opponents, he was not this thorny. He forced himself to suppress the chill in his heart and did not retreat or run. It was not that Su Fengyan had the courage to face death unflinchingly after comprehending the rising tide form, but because of the information revealed by that kick, he did not turn around and flee. Sure enough, the demoness Luo Yang went straight to the point and said, "Come with me to the ice fields. I will kill Tuoba and the treasure will be yours." Su Fengyan nodded without hesitation and said, "Okay." If he did not agree, he would definitely die. The situation was stronger than him, so Su Fengyan could not swallow his pride and pretend to be a hero. As long as this revered Yama did not ask him to slit his throat with the spring and autumn annals, he would obediently agree. Luo Yang was clearly somewhat satisfied with Su Fengyan's straightforward attitude. She turned around and went ahead. Su Fengyan followed behind her, always maintaining a distance of 10 feet. This would ensure that if she wanted to kill someone for no reason, she would not be killed in one blow. In any case, she would risk her life to give him a few moves. Su Fengyan stared at the slender back. She was wearing a white robe that largely concealed her gender, and her hair was tied up with a wooden hairpin. When he first met her in Dunhuang City, if he had not seen the face of the chess and sword music schoolgirl Huang Baozhuang up close, Su Fengyin would not have thought of her as a girl. Her murderous aura was too strong, and she was extraordinarily valiant. At most, she would be taken as a man who was born rich and beautiful. When Su Fengyin was traveling and pretending to be a fortune teller to cheat money, he would often smile at the ugly-looking men and say, "Young master, your appearance is not bad. You are a man of the south and a man of the north, so it will be difficult for you to run away from wealth." However, at that time there would definitely be a turning point and the word, "but," would be added. If not, it would be difficult to cheat the copper coins out of their pockets. During those 3 years of suffering, Su Fengyin concluded that there were two major difficulties. The first was to let the daughter-in-law of another family climb into his bed, and the second was to let the copper coins in other people's pockets fall into his own pocket. Unfortunately, he encountered Luo Yang after Li Zhu was shattered by Dong Tai. Su Fengyin did not even have the slightest thought of taking advantage of her. Luo Yang slowed down her pace, and the distance of 10 zhang became 9 zhang. Su Fengyin quietly pulled back to 10 zhang, and when the distance became 9 zhang, Su Fengyin did not make any unnecessary moves, and allowed her to slowly close the distance to 3 zhang. This woman moved from Beimang to the top 10 of the martial ranking, and after defeating Hong Jingyan she became the 4th in the world. Although she lost to Dong Tai in the 3rd match and stopped at the 4th place, since she had the determination to wrestle with Tuoba, then presumably the battle with Dong Tai that destroyed the city might not have been an all-out battle, because she had used her rain sword against Dong Tai's sword. Before this battle, the world knew that the demon Luo Yang killed people like picking up grass, but she had never used a sword. It was easy to imagine that the most frightening thing about Luo Yang was not her high ranking, but her rapid improvement at such a young age. She was clearly walking the same path as Wang Xinji and Tuoba, which was to use battle to nurture battle. With her back to Su Fengyin, Luo Yang said calmly, "You want to go to the site where the Wu swordsmen were buried?" Su Fengyin said softly, "That's right." Luo Yang said calmly, "Then you and I will meet in 20 days at Tai City in the state of Aquarius." With that, she swept away. Chapter 558. Su Fengyin, who had met Luo Yang and had made an agreement with her, felt a heavy weight weighing down on his heart. He stood where he was and looked at the graceful figure disappearing into the distance. With a gloomy expression he sighed. On the way to the Wu family's 9 swords break 10,000 cavalry, he had already encountered a devil. He was extremely unlucky. As soon as this thought came to his mind, Su Fengyin, who had jinxed himself once in Dunhuang, slapped himself hard on the face. He took off his bookcase, changed into a new set of clothes, and continued on his way to Shihe province. In Dunhuang, Sweet Potato had told him about the situation of the ruins. 200 years ago, after the Wu family sword tomb's elites had all come out and completed the magnificent feat of destroying everything, Beimang did not fly into a rage out of humiliation and vent his anger on the bodies of the Wu family swordsmen. On the contrary, he gave them a grand burial. The swordsmen who died in battle were given a grave, a tablet, and a sword. A few swordsmen who did not accompany him at that time entered Beimang one after another and built a hut to guard the tomb until they died of old age. Beimang, who specially stationed a team of armored cavalry at the battlefield, did not harm the swordsmen. After the swordsmen died, the descendants of the Wu family who guarded the tomb from generation to generation continued to take care of the tomb. This was a stark contrast to the Central Plains practice of digging up the coffins of their enemies and whipping their corpses. When the scholars and celebrities of the Central Plains talked about the customs of the two dynasties, they only said that the northern barbarians drank raw meat and blood and were despicable. Su Fengyin calculated the distance with his fingers. When he arrived at his destination in Shihe State, he found out that the ruins were located in a small basin with a radius of 3 to 4 miles. What made him not know whether to laugh or cry was that perhaps there were too many sword practitioners who came here because of its reputation. Around this sunken basin, there were stacks of stalls selling wine, tea, and fruits. Without exception, no matter what the main business was, there were stacks of martial arts manuals stacked on top of the stalls. Among them, the Wu family swordsmanship manuals were the most numerous. Their names were very scary, such as 9 Swords of the Wu family's Immortals, 10 Sword Techniques of the Sword Tomb, and so on. There were also other secret manuals, most of which had the subtitle 18 Styles of Wang Xinji's Lifelong Secret Art. In any case, they were just scaring people. Su Fengyin spent some money to buy a bag of Shihe's specialty dried green fruits and dates. He picked up one of the manuals in front of him, which had the words, "If you miss this book, You will regret it for the rest of your life, written on the cover of the book. The vendor was a short middle-aged man with shifty eyes. When he saw business he immediately spat, "Young hero, this secret manual is extraordinary. After reading this book, as long as you practice diligently for a few years, I can guarantee that you will become a level 3 expert. Don't look at the tattered books of the Wu family swordsmanship that are sold at the next stall, which are full of extravagant praises. In this world, there is no such thing as becoming a sword immortal after just a few glances. Here you get what you pay for. This mighty bull's divine art is the secret manual of the Xianyuan family in the Liang dynasty. Don't judge it by its reputation, but it is real. I can see that young hero's physique is very good, and with one look I can tell that you are a talented martial arts prodigy. The original price of this manual is 6 taels of silver. Only 3 taels." Su Fengyan was eating green fruits and jujubes. He looked at the stall owner who stretched out 3 fingers and just smiled. Soon, the strong man from the stall next to him pulled the rug out from under him. He sat on the bench with his legs crossed, and while eating sunflower seeds he sneered and said, "Bull power, right? I have a bunch of them here, but they haven't been sold yet. Not to mention 3 taels of silver, one book is only 30 coins and it's a buy one get one free. Do you want it, young master? With this price, it's not expensive to wipe your ass." The short man who was selling both dates and secret manuals turned around and scolded, "Zhang Dapeng, do you need to be taught a lesson?" The strong man threw the sunflower seeds in his face, stood up, bent his arms and exposed his firm muscles. He roared, "Third Mouse, who's teaching who?" The stall owner who was called Third Mouse shrank back, curling his lips. Seeing Su Fengyan put down the shitty book that couldn't be sold, the strong man immediately put on a bright smile and tried to attract business. "Young master, this way please. I Zhang Dapeng am famous around here for being honest and kind. When doing business, the most important thing is that if you don't like it, I'll sell it to you at a discount. After 3 years, if you haven't mastered the divine art, I'll compensate you with double the price. Come, take a look at this book. Sword opens the gate of heaven. It records the old god of swords, Li Chuangong's famous secret art. Look at the exquisite binding, the quality of the pages, and the handwriting. It's obviously the real thing. If young master finds a similar book around here, I'll twist my head off and use it as a urinal for you." Su Fengyan walked over and took the secret book. It was obvious that compared to the dense books sold by ordinary stalls, he put more thought into it and asked the price. "How much is it?" The strong man who was about to say 1 tael of silver forcefully swallowed it back. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Third Mouse next door wanted to take revenge. He stared at the bastard and scared him into silence. He hesitated for a moment, squeezed out a sincere smile and said firmly, 90 taels, I don't bargain here." Su Fengyan reached for the dry purse at his waist and fished out about 30 copper coins. He said expressionlessly, "That's all." The strong man hurriedly grabbed the copper coins. "Friendship is important, friendship is important. It's good that young master has the heart. 30 taels it is. Zhang Dapeng is not the kind of person who would be moved by money." Su Fengyan put the secret book into the box on his back. The stall owner, Zhang Dapeng, did not forget to flatter the young customer with a long sword on his back. "One look and I can tell that young master is a master of swordsmanship. Your future is immeasurable. If you amaze the world with a single brilliant feat in the future, don't forget to tell others about Zhang Dapeng's sword opens the sky gate." Su Fengyan nodded and smiled, Of course. Zhang Dapeng saw that he was about to turn and leave, so he quickly dug out a handful of melon seeds from the bowl and said with a smile, "Young master, don't mind. These things can pass the time. Take your time and walk slowly. Maybe you can even pick up a few peerless secret books." The ruins were separated by a fence, and the stalls were built along the edge of the fence. Su Fengyan slowly walked half a circle, but he did not meet any strange people. He saw a sloppy old man sandwiched between 2 stalls. There was only a piece of cotton cloth in front of him, and a few secret manuals were placed on top of it. It seemed that his business had been poor for many years, and the shabby old man was squatting and taking a nap. The 2 neighbors, one was selling wine and the other was selling tea. Their business was not bad and there were 3 or 4 tables for customers. Su Fengyan saw only a young man and a young woman sitting at a wine table. Their temperament was outstanding in this basin, so he walked over and asked if he could have a seat. The man in satin clothes frowned and was about to refuse, but the woman with a golden hairpin pressed on the back of his hand and said softly, "Young master, please help yourself." Su Fengyan waved his hand and asked the owner of the tavern about the price of the drinks. There were not many drinks sold in the tavern by the weight and the number of bowls. Naturally, they were all coarse drinks that were not presentable. They could quench one's thirst, but it was difficult to get drunk. Su Fengnian ordered a bowl of white wine under the guise of Apricot Blossom Village. With his back to the young man and woman, he bent over and read a few books that the shabby old man had placed on a shabby cotton cloth. There was nothing special about them. The martial arts manuals that followed the trend were not novel at all. When the arrogant man at the opposite table saw this scene, his eyes became even more disdainful and the corners of his mouth curled up into a mocking smile. The tavern owner brought a bowl of cheap distiller's grains. He kindly kicked the old neighbor and reminded him in a bad mood, "Watch the business." The squatting old man was awakened by the kick. His eyes were cloudy. When he saw a drinker bending over to read the secret manuals, he smiled in a hurry. However, his smile showed that he had no front teeth. The drinking man sneered and the delicate woman chuckled. Su Fengnian took a bowl of wine and left the bench. He squatted in front of the cotton cloth that could not even be called a stall, and asked with a smile, "How much are these books?" The old man scratched his gray hair and said with a silly smile, "Young master, just do as you see fit. Just a few coins will do. They're all fake anyway." Su Fengnian took out the last 6 or 7 copper coins from his money bag and handed them to the old man with no front teeth. The old man did not think it was cheap. He took it with a smile, folded 4 or 5 secret books, and handed them to the young master in front of him with both hands. Seeing that he was so stingy, the man at the same table looked at him with disdain. The woman also seemed to think that the young scholar's face was a bit tacky, and it was a waste of his elegant appearance. She drank half of the wine and left the tavern with the man who accompanied her. Su Fengnian, who was indifferent to this, sat back at the table. He opened the book box and put the secret books inside. After fiddling with it for a while, he seemed to be happy that he had found treasures. He waved at the tavern owner and said with a smile, "Boss, do you have any good yellow wine? It doesn't matter if it is expensive. Give me 2 bowls." The tavern owner smiled brightly and became more attentive. Yes, I will give you 2 bowls." Su Fengnian waited for a moment and took 2 bowls of yellow wine from the tavern owner. He squatted in front of the old man with no front teeth again and handed him a bowl. He asked with an authentic Dongyue accent, "Judging from your accent, you used to be from Dongyue, right?" The old man didn't dare to take the bowl at first, but when he heard the familiar accent, he took it and said with surprise, "Yes." Su Fengnian put down the bowl and went to the book box to take a secret book with a 50-tael banknote inside. He sat cross-legged facing the old man and said with a smile, "You can keep one for yourself." The old man didn't stand on ceremony and accepted it with a smile. He thought that this handsome young man was really a good person. People came and went and it was bustling. An old man and a young man sat facing each other. They didn't talk much and just drank slowly. After finishing the wine, Su Fengnian paid the tavern owner and left with the book box. The old man was in a good mood and had nothing to do. He wiped his saliva and hummed a tune as he flipped through the book. Suddenly his eyes widened. The old man with no front teeth opened his mouth and stared at the back of the young man with a sword and a book on his back. He quickly closed the secret book that wasn't hidden at all. He was shocked and confused. One day, Su Fengnian approached the Wu family swordsman graveyard. He was so close but he didn't enter. Chapter 559. With old Huang and the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat, these 2 swordsmen in front of him, it did not matter whether he saw the Wu family ruins or not. Su Fengnian passed by the Wu family ruins but did not enter it. Walking up the northern hillside, he found a group of buildings that were neither donkey nor horse, half temple, half Taoist temple, green and white-robed Taoist priests and red-robed lamas mingled together, each of them soliciting pilgrims. Su Fengnian gnawed on dried green fruit and dates, bypassing the red-mottled outer wall, and stopped at the door to the rear courtyard. There was a bright red Taoist peach talisman hanging above the door. The couplet was written in the characters of the Central Plains. It was rare to see the strong strokes and silver hooks. It was quite a Buddhist style. No matter how lawless you are, seeing this bright mirror hanging high above, ask yourself if you still have the guts. You must know that I can be lenient and forgiving. Put down the butcher's knife and quickly turn around. Su Fengnian crossed the threshold. It was dusk. A group of lamas wearing red robes had finished their evening classes and were sitting on the floor of the corridor outside the main hall, discussing sutras. The older lamas were already 70 or 60 years old, the younger ones were only 7 or 8 years old. They were all wearing red velvet robes. Some of the more lively young lamas simply sat on the railing. They had not been cultivating for a long time, making a string of squeaking noise. The older lamas held the Buddhist prayer beads in front of their chests. Their expressions varied. Some of the debaters were in high spirits, some had knitted brows, while the spectators were either deep in thought or cheerful. Su Fengnian did not approach, he stood quietly in the distance, listening with some difficulty to those Beimeng Gatha debating with each other. The last rays of twilight scattered, several of the young lamas who were absent-minded during the debate, saw the pilgrim Su Fengnian. They grinned and turned their heads to whisper to each other. It was not clear whether they were talking about the new sutras and Buddhist doctrine, or the appearance of a certain elder sister who burned incense the day before. The inside and outside of the courtyard were only a few feet high, a small threshold that could be crossed in one step. But to be out of the secular world was the big threshold. Su Fengnian walked along the wall. Along the way, a middle-aged monk came toward him with a wooden basin in his hand. His expression was calm, he gently saluted with one hand. Su Fengnian returned the salute and went to burn 3 incense sticks outside the main hall to worship the Buddha, the Dharma, and the monks. For some reason he thought of the impending catastrophe of the 2 dynasties, as well as the dragon tree monks saying that one must have the Buddha's heart even without the Buddha's image and Buddhist scriptures. He sighed with emotion. Could an old monk of the 2 Zen temples withstand it? Su Fengnian shook his shoulders, tightened the belt, and slightly hung the bookcase. He was about to find a way to leave through the main entrance when he saw a familiar man and woman coming out of the hall. They were the diners sitting at the same table at the wine stall. The man wore a silk robe, his face was like jade, and he had an elegant demeanor. Around his waist hung a string of golden chains, which was very popular among the scholars of the Southern Dynasty. The woman was delicate and virtuous, wearing a golden hairpin, and her hair was swaying. She had the appearance of a pretty girl from a humble family, but she had the air of a lady from a noble family. The young, handsome man was talking to his companion about the 32 forms of Buddhism, and conveniently explained the difference between the golden body form of Buddhism and the Vajra realm of first-grade martial artists. His words were profound and simple, and it was obvious that he was familiar with the classical classics of Buddhism. The woman nodded her head gently. Su Fengnian did not want to speed up and overtake the 2. His original intention was not to disturb this outstanding man and woman who were only a little bit less than a couple. Unexpectedly, after a while, the man turned his head and glared fiercely at him, as if he felt that Su Fengnian was staring at the woman's graceful figure with ill intentions. However, because of the man's upbringing, he did not say any malicious words. Su Fengnian could only stop and wait until they were far away before he continued forward. With his hearing, he heard the man angrily say, "My dynasty's dharma is already at the end of the world, and it should have been completely cleansed. Take these temples for example. If someone obstructs a monk from becoming a monk, even if you are the abbot, you will be cursed to be blind for generations to come. As a result, most of the monks in these temples are heretical liars who rely on Buddhism. If they don't do shady business, they don't understand what dharma is. Buddhism is a pure land, so how can it be pure? They are a bunch of disgraceful things who deserve to be killed." The woman's temperament was gentle, her way of looking at human affairs seemed to be a lot gentler. She spoke softly, "Those lamas debating sutra are all very nice, they don't look like bad people. You deliberately offered them gold and silver, but they were unwilling to touch the money. Instead they gave you a sutra book." The man's finger flicked the jade bracelet on his waist. "Ding dong. Ding dong." He said with a scornful sneer, "The general trend is irresistible, 1 or 2 good monks are not enough." The woman dismissed it with a laugh. Although she had her doubts, she did not argue with him. From a distance, Su Fengnian saw them burning incense and praying to heaven in front of a cauldron. In order not to annoy them, he simply sat down on the steps, took down the bookcase and pretended to take a short break. Because the poor and pedantic old man selling secret manuals was missing his front teeth, Su Fengnian could not help but think of old Huang of Western Shu. It happened that it was this old swordsman, who was the most unreasonable swordsman, who taught Su Fengnian the most simple truth. This was probably the reason why the truth was always in a plain and quiet place. He remembered that on the way back to Beiliang, after he parted with Wenhua before he met White Fox, the 2 of them were no longer in a difficult situation like they were in the past. They were still in a difficult situation, but after they became familiar with the rules, they also became familiar with the way. Even without old Huang's help, Su Fengnian could still steal chickens, touch dogs, roast sweet potatoes and weave straw sandals on his own. He would not starve to death, nor would he freeze to death. At that time, by chance, he saw a murder case caused by a fight over secret manuals from a distance. The secret manuals were very common, they could not even be called third-rate, but they still lost 5 or 6 lives. "Old Huang, I didn't know that secret manuals are so popular in Jianghu. My Tide Listening Pavilion has several tens of thousands of copies. Why don't we sell them all at a low price? Just treat it as a good thing, okay? Won't the whole Jianghu be deeply grateful to me? How many young and beautiful heroines will secretly throw flirtatious glances at me? Just thinking about it makes me feel good. Chapter 560. Young master, you can't do that. Others don't know, but if Old Huang, heard that there were secret manuals for free when I was young, I would also have to abandon my martial arts. In the end, not many people in Jianghu would be willing to practice martial arts. Old Huang, other than raising horses, what else can you do? Besides, you don't even know how to read. It doesn't matter how many secret manuals I give you. If you don't recognize words, words won't recognize you. Blacksmithing, young master, you don't say. When I was in my early 20s, my front teeth were still there. Old Huang, I was also a famous handsome guy within 10 miles. At least, I was the most handsome blacksmith. There was also a young lady who secretly sent me rice wine. She didn't look good, but her but was very perky. When I left home, I couldn't bear to drink it and buried it in the backyard. I thought that when I returned home, I would dig it out. It would definitely be fragrant. Only one jar? She could only be considered a daughter of an ordinary family. Even if she yearned for my handsome appearance, she couldn't send much. With your appearance, you were also handsome when you were young? Then wouldn't I be handsome to the heavens? Of course I can't compare to young master. If young master was here, that jar of wine would have nothing to do with me. Enough, don't mention wine. Our throats are burning from walking. I'm dying of thirst. I know. Alright, Old Huang, how many years have you left home? Is that jar of rice wine still there? I can't remember how many years I've left home, but it should still be there. It's rice wine that can endure. It's different from the wine that young master used to drink in a glass cup. If young master has a chance to come to my house, I guarantee that you'll have a good drink. AI talking about wine again. I'm so worried. There's smoke in front. Let's go and ask for some water. As usual, the one who opens the door is a man. If it's a woman, I'll do it. Yes. Alright, Old Huang, you only have that jar of wine left. Are you really willing to share half of it with me? Why wouldn't I be willing? If young master thinks it's good, I'll give it all to him. If it were me, I definitely wouldn't be willing. At most, I'll share half with you. Young master is an honest person. I like it. Go go go, if you're a pretty girl, I'll like you. Sigh, it's a pity that I haven't married yet. If only I had a daughter. It's up to you. I don't like it either. Old Huang, don't even think about it. Don't look at me like that. That time he had bumped into a woman who had gone out to work. It was Su Fengyin who had come to ask for 2 bowls of cold water. He still remembered it to this day. When he occasionally looked back, Old Huang was squatting by the side with a bright smile. As always, he was missing his front teeth and looked very comical. While drinking water, Old Huang did not forget to naively talk about how good it would be to have a daughter. Old Huang, if you have a daughter, I'll marry her. However, these words were like the yellow wine that didn't make it into their stomachs. They couldn't say it out loud. Su Fengyin sat on the steps in a daze. Somehow, the woman saw his figure and took the opportunity to go to the Taoist temple to talk about immortality with an old Jinren. She hesitated for a moment and came alone. She stood at the bottom of the steps and smiled warmly. Su Fengyin's detection of the chi of heaven and earth had almost reached the realm of Vajra warrior. He just turned a blind eye to her. The woman was not in a hurry to speak. She seemed to be thinking about how to phrase it. After all, it was somewhat unreasonable for a woman to strike up a conversation with a man. Especially for the descendants of the Southern dynasty, most of the Central Plains customs had been passed down. The woman stood under a dragon claw locust tree that was rarely seen in the northern Mang territory. The afterglow was faint, and even though the locust tree was old and clumsy, it could still be considered luxuriant, setting off the woman's slender and elegant figure that was not tainted with vulgarity. Unfortunately, Su Fengyin was no longer that young prince who flirted with women. Regarding this, he only felt that it was a pity that such a good flower had been taken by a pig. He did not have a good impression of that young master who spoke without thinking, but this did not mean that he would step forward bravely and save her from the abyss of suffering. There were too many women in the world who were willing to be deceived by the flowery words and flowery speech of a man who was superior in appearance or outstanding in talent. Seeing that she did not speak, Su Fengyin took the initiative to speak to save her from embarrassment. He smiled and said, "May I know your name, miss?" This was something he had learned from Wenhua. The fellow with the wooden sword had no ink in his stomach, and it was unknown where he had learned this trick from. Every time he met a girl he liked, he would have to thicken his skin and ask, "Miss, what is your name and where do you live?" When they were traveling together, Wenhua had said this sentence dozens of times. The last time they met, Wenhua said that he really liked a woman. Su Fengnian did not know whether it was true or not. The woman was slightly embarrassed but still said softly, "Lu Qin." Su Fengnian understood in his heart that she was undoubtedly a remnant of the spring and autumn period. When the Liang dynasty ruled the world, she was bitterly called Lu Qin of the Divine Land by the scholars of the Central Plains. As long as one had the surname Lu in the southern dynasty of Beimang, one could probably find 2 or 3 people named Lu Qin out of 10 after they went north. However, a woman named Lu Qin was still relatively rare. Su Fengnian saw the man accompanying her walk out of the main hall with an old Taoist priest with the demeanor of an immortal. He stood up, carried his bookcase and walked towards the main door. Taoism and Buddhism shared incense in the same courtyard. In the Liang dynasty, it would definitely be regarded as an evil practice. In Beimang one could tell the autumn from a single leaf. When Su Fengnian was discharged from the hospital, he remembered a wonderful story in Jianghu. The sick tiger Yang Taisui went to Mount Longhu to have a talk with Qi Xuanzhen, the first person in 100 years of orthodoxy. Qi Xuanzhen patted Yang Taisui on the top of the lotus and half of the devil-slaying platform collapsed. It was said that the immortal patted one's head and tied one's hair to achieve immortality. It could be seen that Yang Taisui's temperament was quite bad when he was young. It was fortunate that he could become lifelong friends with Su Xiao. Qi Xuanzhen, who was in the limelight for a while, could be considered as riding a bull in his previous life. Su Fengnian subconsciously reached out his hand and rubbed a circle. As he walked forward, he continued to draw circles. It was similar to the situation on Mount Wudang when Hong Shixiang was imparting the wisdom of the Wudang sect. The immortal patted his head. Chapter 561. Su Fengnian heard a lot of high-pitched songs along the way. The rhythm was completely different from the music of the Central Plains, and the words were so simple that it made one's heart tremble. There were ants exhorting, young ladies looking forward to marriage, men quarrying stones and children crying. Usually, Su Fengnian would stop at this time and listen to these unsung songs from afar. He would only resume his journey towards the north when the song ended. He was not in a hurry because he only needed to reach Dei City in the Aquarius state in time. The earlier he got there, the earlier he would encounter the devil Luo Yang, and the more trouble it would cause. Along the way, Su Fengnian walked on a rough post route. Half a day later, he even met the young man and woman who were traveling on horseback. After leaving the Wu family ruins, they had changed into clean and neat clothes. The man with the saber became more and more elegant, and the woman with the sword also became more and more valiant. Su Fengnian had entered the northern Mang and had already broken through that fine line. He had stepped into the initial stage of Vajra realm that the people of Jianghu yearned for even in their dreams. He could very well look down from above and examine the young wanderer's aura. He could generally confirm that the wanderer was at the threshold of the 2nd or 3rd rank. Based on the young master's age, he was a genuine and promising young man. Even if he encountered a group of 50 elite horse bandits, he would still be able to protect himself. Presumably, this was also the reason why he dared to leisurely travel the Lust Plateau with a woman. Although the northern Mang was chaotic, it wasn't to the point where anyone would leave a trail of corpses. From Su Fengnian's point of view, Beimang was becoming more and more like the spring and autumn period. Scholars gradually rose to power, and after there were more rules, not everyone had the right to run wild. When traveling north, if he did not draw the spring and autumn sword qi and roll the dragon wall, then he would use his bare hands to caress the roof. He was not that lonely. According to the Taoist scriptures, humans have 3 treasures: essence, qi, and spirit. Essence and spirit are physical objects, and spirit travel is a form of change. Therefore, it is possible to know about the state of ghosts and gods. Putting aside these seemingly mysterious things, spirit, qi, and spirit are the most precious of the 3. That is why there is a saying that a demigod's spirit travels outside his body. The way of the sword was complicated and could be roughly divided into the way of the sword and the way of the sword. The way of the sword focused on the way of the sword, and the way of the sword was the best example. The way of the sword focused on the way of the sword, and there was no shortage of people who focused on the way of the sword. The way of the sword focused on the way of the sword, and the way of the sword was similar to the way of the sword. The way of the sword was similar to the way of the sword, and the way of the sword was similar to the way of the sword. The way of the sword was similar to the way of the sword. He was fascinated. These 4 simple words were extremely difficult for a martial artist. Talent, luck, hard work, none of these could be missing. On a scorching afternoon, Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He saw 2 familiar people who had fallen from the sky. He didn't know if the man and woman were extremely unlucky as they bumped into a huge force that he couldn't tell if they were horse bandits or elite troops. Hundreds of people and horses were wearing leather armor, and each of them carried a standard weapon. It was also the fault of the pampered young master who didn't know how to appreciate human relationships. After being provoked by an elite armored leader, he pulled out his blade and completely destroyed the armored soldier's face. After charging and striking him down from the horse, he even added another blade. If it wasn't for the fact that the fish scale armor was better than normal leather armor, he would have been chopped to death. This angered the crowd. The grassland roaming hunting had always been utilitarian. They all swarmed up, arrows raining down, spears stabbing out, and started a dozen rounds of battle against the arrogant young master. If he had reached the second-level master realm, he would have been able to escape. Unfortunately, he had to protect himself and kill the enemy, and also had to worry about the safety of the girl. He couldn't handle the tide of attacks and his blood was stirred up. After he killed a dozen of cavalries, an arrow finally pierced through his shoulder. Before he could pull out the arrow, a dozen horses were skillfully thrown over, and he was dragged to the ground together with his horse. The girl who was watching had tears in her eyes. Unfortunately, she couldn't help in time. After she was distracted, she was also knocked off the horse by a strong leader with a long spear. This half-soldier, half-bandit guy still had some strength left in his hands, otherwise he might have been stabbed in the heart. Of course, after that, the girl's fate was destined to be worse than being killed in one shot. She was also hit off the horse by a strong leader with a long spear. She was a half-soldier and half-bandit guy who still had some strength left. Otherwise, she might have been stabbed in the heart. Of course, after that, the girl's fate was destined to be better than being killed in one shot. The successful leader laughed wildly and showed off his exquisite equestrian skills. He bent his horse and reached out his arm to hug the weak woman who had no strength to struggle. He held a spear in one hand and choked her neck with the other. He pulled the reins and deliberately stopped the horse to turn around, showing off his power to the red-faced young master on the ground. Su Fengyin squatted on a slope and chewed on a dried green fruit. He watched the battle from the beginning to the end with a great disparity in numbers. He felt sorry for the handsome young master of the Southern Dynasty. It was obvious that he was a fledgling who had not experienced much killing. Originally, with his fighting skills and strong combat power, he could have protected her and escaped far away. Even if they could not escape the pursuit, as long as they were not completely surrounded, there would be much room for maneuver. When the Jianghu warriors fought against the enemy's armored soldiers, many of the so-called hundreds or even thousands of people could fight against them. It was rare to see someone like Li Chenggang who did not retreat at all. Most of them fought as they retreated. Under the premise that there were only a few mortal enemies, they would wear each other out. Such a battle would still be recognized by the Jianghu. Su Fengyin speculated that this Gong son of a noble family had probably heard too many heart-wrenching legends of the seniors and had become a one-track mind. That was why he was exhausted by the not-so-brilliant method of the 100-man cavalry. Su Fengyin's eyesight was not bad now, and he could tell that the man's moves and routines were all brilliant and ingenious. On the chessboard he had many new routines that had never been spread before. Even some of the widely spread old-fashioned moves could be changed in his hands. It was obvious that this man either had the guidance of a famous teacher, or he had an extraordinary foundation. He would have a great chance of winning if he were to fight against someone of the same level. However, in the real Jianghu, it was more common to beat an old master to death with random fists. Brutal ganging up was better than a hero. Jianghu was a bloody job where one's head was tied to one's belt. Who would allow you to move step by step as if you were playing chess? You would have long thrown away the chessboard and punched the bridge of your nose. Su Fengyin arched his back like a leopard and tried his best to hide. He stopped near a small hill 100 steps away and saw the leader throw the woman in his arms off the horse. He jumped off the horse and kicked her in the chest. The woman, who only practiced martial arts as a way to maintain her health, almost fainted on the spot. She curled up and gasped for breath like a pitiful black fish that had been thrown ashore. Her face was pale. The leader squatted down and grabbed a large strand of the woman's hair. He shook it and looked at the extravagantly dressed foreign young master who did not know what was good for him. The latter was already wrapped up like a rice dumpling by the horse's rope, and there were even a few chains tied to his limbs. He was held up in the air by the 4 groups of people. Some of the more impatient knights spat saliva after getting off the horse and slapped the handsome young master's face with their scabbards. After a tough battle, more than 20 brothers had died. Everyone would be bloodthirsty to make a living in the desert. On one hand, human lives were worthless and killing people for their goods was common. However, on the other hand, their brothers had to be worth money. This had nothing to do with brotherhood, but if they were not careful, they would be eaten by other people. This group of people had their current status because of the big fish eating the small fish time and time again. If they had a few dozen people, they would be able to act like a big boss. If they had 100 people, even the imperial army would have a headache. If they had 8 or 1,000 people, then they would not be able to be horse bandits. They would just go to the imperial tent and get a general. This was the unwritten rule of the Xia province. When they reached 300 people, they could openly go to the provincial capital where the festival edict was stationed. They could get whatever they wanted. In short, the number of brothers they brought was the same as the number of officials. These cavalrymen were typical Beimang people. Their hair was shaved and braided at the back of their heads. The brawny man in fish-scale armor turned his head and did not say anything. The 4 groups of dismounted cavalrymen who were pulling the iron chains also understood tacitly and began to tug of war with hideous smiles. A few men in scaled armor who looked like leaders gathered together. Their eyes were not only filled with malevolence, but they were also clearly calculating and weighing the pros and cons. As they watched the show, they muttered. Perhaps they felt that since they had formed a deadly feud, there was no need to care about face and consequences. Anyway, human lives in the desert were like weeds, withered and flourishing with each passing year. There were not so many thin streams that flowed endlessly. Regardless of the identity and background of this young master, they really did not believe that the big families of the southern dynasty would bring people to the Xia province to seek revenge. There were 4 iron chains in 4 directions, and there were a total of more than 20 people. They stretched the chains with all their strength. Fortunately, the young man who was about to die had a high-tier martial art, but he suffered even more unknowingly. One of the horse bandit leaders felt that it was not enough, so he ordered his subordinates to get on their horses and put another iron chain around the young man's neck. He was determined to tear the young man's body apart with 5 horses. The 5 horses pulled with all their might. The young man's eyes were red, and his wrists and ankles were bleeding. Not to mention his weak neck, he let out a miserable roar like a dying beast. The only thing left in his body was his chi. The iron chains trembled like ripples in water, and it actually caused the 5 horses to take a few steps back. Suddenly, the iron chains became as straight as spears, and the horses holding the chains immediately died. No one had expected this person to be so brave and fierce. The leader in fish-scale armor vented his anger on the young woman. He threw her to the ground and handed her over to his subordinates to look after. He personally got on his horse and called for 4 of his strong subordinates to deal with this dying beast that could not be underestimated. The warhorse's hooves moved forward with great difficulty. Blood poured out from the young man's limbs and neck. If there were no accidents, the relatively weak neck would be torn apart first, followed by the arms and legs. However, these horse bandits were skilled at this. The cavalrymen in charge of pulling the 5 corpses were very particular about strength. They would tear off the young man's arms and legs first, leaving behind the neck and the remaining leg. Only then could this bloody feast be considered complete. Chapter 562. Compared to hanging corpses with spears and lances, this kind of method was even more vicious and horrifying. It was a method invented by the northern Mang's border army. It was unknown how many Liang dynasty captives had died under these 5 horses. The only flaw was that the northern Liang army loved to fight to the death. After the battle, there weren't many survivors. Moreover, there were many small-scale skirmishes that happened without warning, often between the 2 armies' most elite crossbowmen and horse stalls. The northern Liang army always had the advantage. Therefore, a captured northern Liang captive was more valuable than any beautiful woman in the northern Mang royal court. Often they could be sold for a jaw-dropping price. For example, Tao Qianji, who had left the city behind, would kill a northern Liang soldier every day. In the eyes of the northern Mang officials and nobles, this kind of behavior wasn't killing people, but large amounts of gold. Beimang was even more disciplined. Killing a Beiliang soldier on the battlefield was a big crime after retirement. Just as the man was about to be torn apart, the 5 people on the horse died almost instantly without any obvious wounds. They just fell off the horse and died immediately. A few horse bandit leaders who were qualified to wear scale armor gathered their courage to take a closer look. They saw a small hole between the man's eyebrows, as if a small sharp object had pierced a hole. It was inexplicably strange. The people of Beimang were not divided into rich and poor. They all believed in Buddhism and fate. However, no matter how devout they were, they would not hesitate to kill people. However, when disaster came, even the most vicious people would hesitate, afraid that they would really annoy those dignified clay bodhisattvas. At this time, the 5 people died in a strange way beyond imagination. Even if it was not done by immortals, it was done in secret. More than 20 people were killed just to deal with a crown prince of the southern dynasty. The horse bandits came and went like the wind, so they immediately turned over and dismounted. A meticulous leader wearing scale armor wanted to secretly kill the man and woman without leaving any future trouble. But immediately, something pierced between his eyebrows, causing a trace of undetectable blood. As a result, no horse bandits dared to make a move. They all ran away in an instant. Men and horses had 6 legs so they could escape quickly. The woman from the southern dynasty called Lu Qin did not know why. After a moment of absent-mindedness, she realized that she had survived a disaster. Crying, she got up and ran to the young man who was her family friend. She untied the iron chain with difficulty, especially his neck, which was badly mutilated and shocking. She felt incomparable pain just by looking at it. She suppressed her sobs and sat cross-legged beside him. She tore off her sleeve and bandaged a few wounds that exposed the bone. The woman was really made of water. Her tears did not stop. She softly called his name, Jianghu, over and over again, afraid that he would die here. She did not have the courage to live alone. The journey back was thousands of miles. How could she, a weak woman who was more familiar with holding a sword than holding an embroidery needle, go back? Besides, if he died, what fun would there be for her to live? The young man who was lucky enough to walk back to the world of the living slowly took a breath. After exhaling a large mouthful of turbid air, he forced a smile and said with difficulty, "I won't die." Taking back his flying sword, Su Fengnian wanted to leave, but he saw a horse in the distance who was still looking at him. He had to be patient and stay where he was to ensure that he would see the Buddha through to the west. Once again he rode his sword out of his sleeve and assassinated the unlucky horse gang. He leaned close to the ground and listened. The horse gang finally accepted their fate and fled. Su Fengnian quietly stood up, carrying his bookcase, and was about to walk away. He took it as a chance encounter and was doing a chivalrous deed for once. He did not expect the woman to repay him with her body, nor did he expect the young man from the aristocratic family to bow down to him. This kind of brotherly relationship was too pretentious to bear any scrutiny. Digging around, he took out the last few dates and threw them into his mouth. He saw the swordsman who could no longer stand up fall to the ground with the woman's help, bleeding profusely. However, the woman was not skilled in treating external injuries, so she was helpless and could only choke with sobs. The man with a bright future naturally did not want to die in the wilderness. It was just that no one could help him. He sat on the ground, his face as ferocious as an evil spirit. It was unknown whether it was caused by the pain or the sadness of his past. The woman looked even more heartbroken and guilty. She regretted that on the way back, he had tried to sleep in the same bed several times, but she refused because of her modesty. If she had known this would happen, she would have given him her virginity. Su Fengnian saw that after the arrogant man was beaten into the dust, his spirit began to slack again. He showed signs of dying if he was not treated in time. He frowned and had to walk out of the small mound. His figure appeared in the world, and he had to pretend that he saw injustice on the road. He ran in small steps toward the man and woman, squeezing out a flawless face of fear and nervousness. The young man's eyes were already cloudy, but when he saw Su Fengnian, he showed a touch of light. When he did not find any flaws, he returned to his deathly stillness. However, he gently put one hand on the iron chain. Su Fengnian squatted in front of them, took down the book box and turned his back to the man and woman who had survived the disaster. The man seemed to be thinking about something, but in the end he did not use the iron chain as a weapon to kill this kind-hearted passerby. Su Fengnian, who seemed to be oblivious to everything, hurriedly took out a porcelain bottle from the book box that he had brought from Dunhuang. It contained an ointment that was as black as ink. It was an ointment that could reconnect tendons, lengthen bones, and grow flesh. The ointment was like oil mixed with water, and it was very sticky. The mouth of the bottle was facing down, and it did not pour out in torrents. It was just like the scene of water droplets sliding down a lotus leaf, slowly dripping down. The young man's eyes were cold as he looked at the black ointment dripping on the wounds on his hands and feet. It was cool to the bone and indescribably pleasant. Because he knew the goods, he was more shocked in his heart. How did this stranger, who could only spend a few coins to buy a fake secret manual, get this bottle of ointment that was worth 100 or 200 gold? Su Fengnian rolled up his sleeves and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He raised his head and smiled with a pained expression, as if he had just made up his mind after a great struggle. He handed the bottle to the woman called Lu Chen and said with a grimace, "This ointment is a secret ancestral recipe. One bottle can be sold for a lot of silver. Apply it 3 times a day in the morning, afternoon, and night. In less than half a day this young master will be healed." "Oh right, I didn't have time to tell you my name at the Wu family sword tomb. I'm Su Lang, also from the Southern Dynasty. I live in Lion Alley in Maple City." Su Fengnian obviously hesitated for a moment, and then said in a low voice, "Not to mention the ointment, this handmade celestial globe porcelain bottle is also worth some silver." Lu Chen seemed to have heard a rather funny joke. She felt relieved and smiled through her tears. She wiped away the tears on her cheeks and said softly, "When young Master Zhong and I return, we'll definitely go to Maple City to visit young Master Su." When he heard the words young Master Zhong that had exposed his identity, a trace of gloom flashed across Zhong Gui's face. However, he hid it well. He clenched the hand that had loosened the iron chain and tried to maintain a calm expression. He brushed his hand across his neck that had stopped the bleeding and said softly with a smile, "Of course I should thank young Master Su for saving my life." Su Fengnian continued to play the role of an ordinary scholar who was shrewd but not smart. He smiled and said, "You flatter me, you flatter me." Although Lu Chen was born in a noble family of the Southern Dynasty, there were a few elder brothers in the family who supported the heavy burden. It was not her turn to personally experience the storm. Her mind was relatively simple. Her knowledge of schemes was limited to the hearsay that was used as a joke by her elder brothers. Her experience was shallow and natural. She could not detect the subtle changes that Zhong Gui had made and could not see through Su Fengnian's untraceable disguise. To the children of wealthy families like Lu Chen and Zhong Gui, who were so honorable that they could become the honored guests of the Shiha State Festival Edict, they did not have to care about the schemes of ordinary people. However, today's unexpected disaster made her feel especially grateful. Su Fengnian asked, "Do you want me to escort you back?" Lu Chen wanted to nod and agree, but Zhong Gui shook his head and said, "No need." At this moment, the noble demeanor of the heir of a noble family was unmistakable. Lu Chen did not know the knack of it and only thought that Zhong Gui could not put down his face. Seeing that his eyes were firm and stubborn, she could not say anything more. Su Fengnian smiled and reluctantly glanced at the porcelain bottle in Lu Chen's hand before he stood up and bid farewell. Lu Chen had a good impression of this stranger's shallow pretense. Compared to those Southern Dynasty scholars who used to wag their tails and pretend to be Taoist, he was much more pleasing to the eye. She suddenly widened her eyes. She saw that the man carrying the booklet had just stood up and turned around when he was hit in the back by the iron chain that was like a straightened poisonous snake. He flew forward and fell to the ground without moving again. He was most likely dead. She turned her head and looked at Zhong Gui blankly, her eyes full of horror. Zhong Gui said coldly, "You can see that I am in dire straits. As for him, he does not have the fortune." Chapter 563. Lu Chen covered her mouth and was about to cry. Zhong Gui seemed to feel that her tone was too stiff and cold, so she changed her tone to a softer one. Ignoring the blood spurting from her neck due to the accumulation of power, she said gently, "This Su Lang, of all times, appeared when you and I were in trouble. He is most likely a bandit who is in cahoots with the horse gang and has the intention of casting a long line to catch a big fish. Miss Lu, you are inexperienced and don't know the dangers of Jianghu. Most of these desperados are extremely cunning and their skills are not inferior to the foxes in the officialdom. To say the least, we would rather kill by mistake than let him go by mistake." Zhong Gui saw that she still had lingering fear. Her limpid eyes were filled with sorrow and a trace of wariness. She said softly, "If I die here, what will you do?" "I don't want to die. Even if I die, I have to send you home." Lu Chen's tears suddenly flowed out of her eyes and she threw herself into Zhong Gui's arms. She was no longer as worried about the life and death of Su Lang as she was when she first met him. Between life and death, they shared trials and tribulations together. Women who were used to a rich and leisurely life might not like to help each other in difficult times. However, how many people could withstand such a scene and such words engraved in their hearts by Zhong Gui? Just a few words were already far more effective than the sweet nothings that could be said in a peaceful and stable time. Zhong Gui hugged her delicate body and sneered, her eyes indifferent. Obviously, this descendant of the Zhong family who repaid kindness with enmity was good at martial arts. His ability to pick flowers was also profound. However, this warm scene was interrupted by a few coughs. For the first time since meeting Su Lang, Zhong Gui showed fear. Su Fengnian stood up and patted his sleeves, murmuring, "It's tiring to be a good person. No wonder there are so many devils in Beimang." Seeing the expressionless man carrying a box and a sword walking over, Zhong Gui forced a smile and said guiltily, "Young Master Su, please don't be offended. It's my fault for acting so abruptly. It's just that Zhong Gui's identity is sensitive and I can't let my guard down when I travel outside." Jianghu saw that the person was calm and did not even have a mocking expression. He knew that something was wrong and hurriedly tried to make up for it. My name is Jianghu, a descendant of the Zhong family of the Southern Dynasty. I can make up for it and give young Master Su a great fortune. Young Master, your skills are outstanding. With the support of my Zhong family, you will definitely have a meteoric rise. As he spoke, Jianghu grabbed the iron chain with one hand. He wouldn't shed tears until he saw the coffin. Su Fengnian finally rewarded him with a smile. Come, let's see if you can kill me again. At this moment, Jianghu could neither make a move nor let go. Ever since he was born, this kind of shame and resentment was unbearable. It was only slightly better than being dragged by 5 horses just now. Jianghu was lucky to return to the world of the living from the netherworld while Lu Qin fell from the world of the living to the netherworld. She sat aside blankly, her heart cold as if it had fallen into an ice cellar. Su Fengnian drew a circle with one hand and slapped it on Jianghu's head. Jianghu sank into the ground and his head and limbs exploded at the same time. It was as if someone had smashed him into a meat patty with a sledgehammer. It was more miserable than being torn apart by 5 horses. A celestial being patted the head. It was not only used to tie hair and receive immortality. Fresh blood splattered all over Lu Chen's body, but she just stared blankly and remained indifferent. She was simple, but she was not stupid. It was almost the talent of the children of big clans to know the big picture from small details. Su Fengnian was about to draw another circle and let Lu Qin and Jianghu die together as a pair of lovebirds. She suddenly raised her head and asked, I want to know if you are in cahoots with the horse gang. I beg you, don't lie to me. Su Fengnian shook his head. Her heart finally died like ashes and she waited calmly. Su Fengnian did not show any mercy to the fairer sex and continued to raise his hand like an immortal caressing her head. However, she was disturbed once again. She suddenly burst into heart-wrenching sobs. I don't want to die. Su Fengnian walked over. After taking a few steps, she sat on the ground and slid back a few steps. Su Fengnian did not move forward. He squatted down and stretched out his hand. Give me back the porcelain bottle. She threw out the small bottle as if it was scalding her hand. In her panic, she did not throw it accurately. Su Fengnian reached out and caught it. He controlled the bottle and placed it back into the box. Lu Qin seemed to have accumulated 20 years of shrewdness in an instant. Her voice trembled as she said, Young Master Su, how can you not kill me? I am the legitimate granddaughter of the Southern Dynasty's first Lu family. I am different from Jianghu. I don't have any ambitions. I just want to live a good life. After I get married, I will help my husband and teach my children. As long as you don't kill me and don't sully my body, I am willing to be your slave for half a year. Moreover, I promise that when I return to the Lu family, I will not mention a word about what happened today. I will only say that Jianghu died in the hands of a 100-horse gang. Looking at the man who looked like a scholar curling up the corner of his lips with a hint of mockery, Lu Qin realized that he had made a mistake and immediately corrected himself. I only said that Jianghu had died on the way to the magistrate's mansion in the Shihe region. I didn't know anything about it. At this point, her eyes rippled and sparkled with determination. She bit her lips and said slowly, If you don't kill me, I'll say that I've had sex with Jianghu. If the Zhong family doesn't believe me, they can get the old maid to check my body. They won't be able to find any flaws. Any man would understand what she meant. She was willing to pay the price of her virginity in exchange for her life. Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and lamented that the human heart was higher than the heavens. Lu Qin saw that he had no intention of killing her. She reached out and stroked a strand of messy hair on her temples and continued, I don't dare to hope that you will return to the Lu family with me. However, since you have something on me and my Lu family has a good reputation in the Southern Dynasty, I will not allow such a big scandal to spread. I also don't want to provoke the Zhong family because of this. Therefore, you don't have to worry about me not being obedient to you. You only need to involve me from afar. I am willing to be your marionette. I believe that with your outstanding skills and wisdom, you will be able to find a way to control me and not get into danger. Su Fengnian wanted to take out some dates but found that his bag was empty. He retracted his hand and said with a smile, You are very smart. How can you be fooled by Jianghu, a rich playboy? Lu Qin actually had the courage to laugh and said self-mockingly, It's not that Jianghu is good. It's just that the Zhong family's background is better than the Lu family's. Otherwise, how can a younger brother of a side branch family be said to be a match for a granddaughter of the first branch family? Su Fengnian nodded his head in deep agreement. She was indeed a woman from a rich and powerful family with the roots of wisdom. Lu Chen's eyes instantly turned cold. She gritted her teeth and said, You still want to kill me? Su Fengyin, who had just had the urge to kill, asked curiously, a woman's intuition? She asked back, isn't it? Without waiting for Su Fengyin to make a move, Lu Chen stood up and charged at him like a madwoman. She was seeking her own death. She punched and kicked without any rhyme or reason and cried pitifully, you bastard! Great demon! I'll fight it out with you. She nagged and scolded him as if she was beating him up. Over and over again she only used a few old-fashioned methods that didn't hurt him at all. Su Fengyin sent her flying with a slap. She was immediately stunned. He looked at the crazy woman who was covering her face and said, whether I kill you or not depends on your performance. Bury Jianghu first and then follow me to the hinterland of Shihe region. I need you. Lu Chen's eyes lit up as if she had just been pardoned. She glanced at Jianghu's mangled corpse and laughed coldly, it's better if I don't collect the corpse. She immediately received another slap on her face. She flipped over and fell heavily onto the yellow sand like a gray sparrow. Su Fengyin mocked, men are cold-blooded. Who knows, they might even be ambitious and ruthless. You're just a woman. Is it very likable for you to be so heartless? Lu Chen lowered her head. Both her cheeks had been slapped. She was frightened and meek as she said, I know I'm wrong. Su Fengyin used his immortal touching the top, to create a big pit, which he used as Jianghu's grave. He watched her move the pile of flesh and blood into the pit bit by bit. He asked her about the Zhong family and the Lu family. She answered him one by one without the slightest bit of falsehood. She asked carefully in between, was it young master who killed those horse gang? Su Fengyin didn't say anything. He just patiently watched her pick up the soil and cover it up. After filling it up, she didn't forget to jump and step on it to make it less obvious. After she calmed down, she tilted her head and asked, Jianghu, young master, do you think a cassia tree will grow here in the future? Su Fengyin scolded, you're sick in the head. The woman covered in blood curtsied and curtsied charmingly. She smiled and said, please save me, young master. Su Fengyin twitched the corner of his mouth. You're really sick in the head. You've lost your mind. There's no saving you. The woman stood alone on the grave. Her smiling face was sad but beautiful. Chapter 564. After burying the grandson of the Zhong family, Su Fengyin played with the string of golden bells he took from the corpse. When the wind blew, the bells jingled. He brought Lu Chen, who had somehow become a maid, to the center of Shihe province. Not long after, they met another group of horse gang. There were more than 30 of them. Compared to the previous group of bandits, these horse gang were much more shabby. They did not have many standard weapons, not to mention the armor exclusive to military officers like fish scale armor. The only bright spot was that the leader of the horse gang held a horse lance. It was a pity that it was so exquisite that it looked gaudy. The head of the lance was made of steel, the handle was made of red copper, and the body of the lance was painted red. Most importantly, it was tied with a bunch of sable-embroidered balls. After the spring and autumn war, the expensive and difficult-to-use horse lances were as rare as iron halberds. It could be said that people who raised them in their homes did not recognize them. Those who were used to using horse lances were often the children of aristocratic families who were skilled in martial arts. They used them to flaunt their status. However, when it came to the real battlefield, when two armies fought, the normal soldiers would rush up when they saw such people in order to gain more merits. The children with lances would often be surrounded and become targets. They attracted more attention than those generals who wore bright armor. This was because the children of aristocratic families who loved horse lances were mostly inexperienced soldiers. When they fought, it was much easier for them to cut off their heads than the experienced military officers who knew how to protect themselves. Su Fengyin did not say anything and rushed forward to capture them. He beat them up a little and got the truth out of them. As expected, these horse gang were hired by Jianghu to put on a show. They wanted to use this to win Lu Chen's heart. They were really working hard for no one. Lu Chen saw that these horse gang were slaughtered cleanly. There was a strange look in her eyes. Su Fengyin picked 2 mounts and spurred them on. After traveling for 30 miles, he did not see any signs of human habitation. After pausing for a moment, he took out some water from his sack to clean his horse's nose. Lu Chen, who was wrapped in a headscarf, lifted a corner of her head, revealing her slightly dry cherry lips. She asked curiously, are you really called Su Lang? You should be at the master realm, right? Su Fengyin did not reply. She asked again, are you trying to make an issue out of my identity? I've already told you before that Jianghu and I just left the group and took a detour. Now I'm the only one going to the magistrate's mansion in Shihe province. Once my whereabouts are discovered, how will you explain it? Lu Chen was not discouraged when he saw that the young man was still practicing his vow of silence. He asked, riding a horse and stopping every 30 miles, "Are you from Beiliang?" Su Fengyin was washing her horse. She didn't even raise her head. She left, put away the water bag, mounted the horse and continued to move forward. The stubborn Lu Chen struggled to keep up with him and kept pace with him. She tilted her head and stared at the young man who was shrouded in mist like an infatuated woman looking at her lover. Su Fengyin finally spoke, "I changed my mind. I'll leave after I send you to a safe place." Lu Chen's eyes were unfocused. Su Fengyin mocked, "Just a moment ago, you were so desperate that you wanted to be buried with Jianghu. How come you're not even willing to collect her corpse in the blink of an eye? Is it just you or all women with noble surnames like you? Even if I take you in as a concubine maid, you might strangle her to death one night. You won't be able to sleep well." Lu Chen pondered seriously for a moment, as if she was reflecting on herself. She slowly replied, "I hate it when people lie to me. I once told myself that it doesn't matter who I marry in the future. If he sleeps with another woman, he has to tell me first. I don't mind if he doesn't bring her into the family to disgust me. I'll continue to be a good housekeeper. But if I'm the last one to know that he sleeps with another woman and becomes a joke, I'll definitely want to cut off his manhood with a pair of scissors and paint that woman's face until she can't seduce another man for the rest of her life." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "You don't look like that kind of woman. When I first saw you in the Wu family ruins, I mistakenly thought that you were easy to get along with, the kind of woman who doesn't dare to go back to her mother's house to complain after being wronged." Lu Chen bit her lips and said, "But I'm that kind of woman." Su Fengyin smiled faintly and said, "Should I smash your head with a slap?" Her charming eyes were like silk. "Young master, you can't be so heartless." Su Fengyin dismissed it with a smile. It was very interesting to talk to her and watch her do things. It was the same principle as writing about unfairness. It was always unexpected. She sensed that this young master Su was in a good mood, so she went along with it and said softly, "I'm guessing that young master must be from a martial arts family and not a general's descendant like Jianghu. That's because young master will feel guilty if he kills someone." Su Fengyin held his stomach and laughed. "What do you know?" She tilted her head and asked with an innocent face, "Did I guess wrong?" Su Fengyin scolded jokingly, "Don't pretend with me. I've seen so many beautiful women that I can't even count them. Your looks aren't even worth 70 cents. It's not worth mentioning." Lu Chen didn't care about this belittling and said to herself, "I've never been a good-looking woman." Su Fengyin changed the topic. "Say this time the Zhong and Lu families have joined hands to head to the Xia state capital. Your father, Lu Gue, is leading the Lu family. What do you think they're planning?" Lu Chen shook her head and said, "I've never been concerned about these things and I don't know about the inside story." Su Fengyin glanced at her limpid eyes and gave up on probing further. Lu Chen smiled and said, "I can't believe it. That Zhong Gue, who's known to be talented and courageous, died just like that. Moreover, he didn't die in a heroic manner at all." Su Fengyin casually threw away the string of golden bells. His original intention was to borrow Lu Chen's identity to go on a killing spree in the heart of Beimang and make a killing spree. However, he found out that the experts of the Zhong family were all present on this trip, especially Zhong Liang, who was ranked 7th among the demons. Even Zhong Shintong, one of the 12 great generals of Beimang, had disguised himself and hid among them. After weighing the pros and cons, he didn't want to get himself into trouble and delay his agreement with white dress Luo Yang. Even if he could escape the Zhong family's pursuit, he might not be able to leave Beimang. Seeing this, Lu Chen smiled and pulled out a dagger from her sleeve. She said straightforwardly, "I was looking for an opportunity to stab you to death. Now should I give you the dagger or throw it away?" Su Fengyin didn't even turn his head and said, "Keep it. If you don't take it out before the next 30 miles, you'll die an unknown death just like Jianghu." Lu Chen smiled happily and said, "I made the right bet." Su Fengyin sighed inexplicably and said, "In this Jianghu, experts are common but experts are rare." Lu Chen asked, "Young master, are you an expert or an expert?" Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "I can't be an expert." The two of them spent the night in the desert and rested at the bottom of a leeward slope. The temperature difference between day and night was huge. Su Fengyin picked up many dry branches and threw them into the bonfire. Other than secretly nurturing his sword and maintaining the bonfire, he pretended to sleep the whole night. When dawn broke, he saw that she was still dozing off, so he walked to the top of the slope alone and looked up at the sky. Suddenly, Su Fengyin rushed back to the foot of the slope and stared at the woman who was trembling with a dagger in her hand with a complicated expression. She was actually ruthless enough to use the dagger to cut 4 bloody grooves on her own face, causing her skin to split open. What kind of tenacious woman would do such a thing? Actually, with their intelligence, they knew that every step closer to the state city of Shihe was most likely one step closer to the Yellow Springs. The Zhong and Lu families didn't lack shrewd and ruthless characters. Jianghu, who had supreme skills, died, but she, a weak woman, unexpectedly survived. It was almost impossible for her to muddle through and continue to live a wealthy life. Even Su Fengyin couldn't think of how she could fabricate a flawless reason. He said that he wanted to send her to a safe place, but in fact to the woman surnamed Lu, the tree that used to shelter her from the sun was the most dangerous place in the world. This pair of man and woman whose fates were intertwined for no reason seemed to be a good person. After the disfigurement, she said that the enemy killed Jianghu and then let her live. It was a humiliation to the Zhong and Lu families. That was why she forcefully made an eye on the chessboard of a dead end and gave birth to a fit of anger. However, wasn't this method too costly for a woman? Wasn't it too decisive? Both men and women cherished their lives. Men cherished their lives and women cherished their appearances. This was common sense. Su Fengyin immediately surged with hostility and almost had the urge to kill her. However, he slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and suppressed his murderous intent. The woman looked at the young man in front of her whose surname she only knew. Her eyes were dazed. Instead of tears flowing down her cheeks, her face was covered in blood. This woman who had once said that she wasn't good-looking finally stopped looking unfocused and some tears appeared in her eyes. She held back her tears and smiled. It hurts. Chapter 565. Su Fengyin and the disfigured woman rested in a small town that was not covered by city walls. They were still 3 days away from the provincial capital. She wore Su Fengyin's scholar's robes, which were rather loose. The 4 scars on her face had begun to form calluses. Fortunately, in order to not leave any traces and let her wounds heal at the same time as Zhonggui's death, she was able to apply ointment to speed up her recovery. However, the desert wind was rough. After being brushed by her face, even with a headscarf covering her face that was no longer delicate, she was often badly mutilated. The pain she suffered was probably not any easier than being cut by a dagger. She did not cry much. Su Fengyin also did not say anything to comfort her. The two of them remained silent. Occasionally, Lu Chen would take the initiative to ask about some Jianghu matters. Su Fengyin would also tell her everything in a serious and gentle manner. Perhaps he was afraid that if he made her laugh, she would suffer again. Su Fengyin and her had just entered the city when the sky suddenly changed. Dark clouds covered the sun. It was clearly noon, but the sky was as dark as night. A sandstorm was approaching. Su Fengyin and Lu Chen had no choice but to enter a shabby inn. The innkeeper took advantage of the situation and raised the price as high as he could. Su Fengyin's original intention was that it did not matter if he was cheated of a few taels of silver. As long as he had a place to stay, he did not expect Lu Chen to be so stubborn. She tugged at his sleeve and refused to be cheated of money. It seemed that she was sincere when she said that he was good at running a household. Su Fengyin had no choice but to turn around under the innkeeper's rolling eyes. He wanted to go to another and that was more considerate. Before he even stepped over the threshold, he saw merchants and travelers swarming over from the narrow streets. Judging by the situation, if he did not stay in this inn, he might have to sleep on the streets and hide in the alleys to avoid the sandstorm. Su Fengyin smiled at her. She did not insist. The innkeeper was narrow-minded and deliberately made things difficult for her. He doubled the price. Lu Chen was so angry that her shoulders trembled. Su Fengyin put his hand on her shoulder and shook his head. He obediently paid the deposit and took the wooden token and key to the residence in the backyard. Lu Chen, whose face was covered by a scarf, felt a little gloomy. Su Fengyin opened the wooden door and the room was filled with a moldy smell. After closing the door, he took down the bookcase and the spring and autumn sword. There was a clay jar on the table. He shook it a little and there was not a single drop of water left. Lu Chen sat quietly on the stool. She took off her scarf and gently turned her head away. She did not meet Su Fengyin's eyes. She only asked, "With young master's superb skills, why do you have to lower your voice to these commoners? You don't even need to unsheath your sword to scare them out of their wits." Su Fengyin closed the 2 leaky windows tightly and sat in front of the table. He smiled and said, "Do you think that all experts have to have a pair of cold eyes? Or are they born with the backs of tigers and waists of bears? Or do they want to hang 2 pieces of tiger or leopard carcasses on their backs? Or do they want to hang knives, spears, rods, and spears all over their bodies? Only then will they look imposing when they go out adventuring." The corners of Lu Chen's mouth curled up slightly. She could hear the teasing in his words and her mood improved a little. Su Fengyin bent down and took out a few secret manuals from the bookcase. He placed them in front of her and sat cross-legged on the stool in a relaxed manner. He said softly, "I've been flipping through these manuals when I have nothing to do these past few days. I even practiced according to the moves inside. Only then did I realize that they were really fun." She said softly, "Why don't you try it?" Su Fengyin waved his hand and said, "That won't do. What if the sky falls and the earth shatters?" Without waiting for her to speak, Su Fengyin said softly, "Don't laugh." She really pulled a long face. Su Fengyin picked up the tea jar and said, "I'll go get some water and food. Wait here." Lu Chen nodded. She picked up a fake secret manual and casually flipped through it. Su Fengyin soon returned with a tea jar filled with cold water. Lu Chen raised her head and asked, "You spent money again?" Su Fengyin smiled and said, "There's no other way. Little ghosts are hard to deal with. A pot of water costs half a tael of silver. Later we'll just drink it like nectar. Alright, the food will have to wait for a while." Lu Chen lowered her head to continue reading and said, "We can afford to wait." Without knocking on the door, a waiter of the inn casually pushed the door open and entered. Lu Chen hurriedly grabbed her headscarf and hurriedly wrapped it around her head. The waiter was holding a large wooden tray with a few sloppy and crude dishes on it. He inadvertently caught a glimpse of Lu Chen's face and jumped in fright, almost knocking over the tray. He hurriedly put down the food and ran out. Just as he crossed the threshold, he shouted loudly, come and see, there's an ugly freak in the house. I saw a ghost during the day." Lu Chen tugged at Su Fengyin's sleeve. However, Su Fengyin gently shook and strode out of the door. He kicked the unlucky guy who spoke without thinking, causing him to sink into the courtyard wall. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. After returning to the house, Lu Chen said sadly, "I've always been ugly." Su Fengyin said calmly, "Yes, you're not good looking. With the makeup on your face, it'd be strange if you looked good. However, if anyone dares to say it out loud and into my ears, I'll let him." She continued, "Go and die." Su Fengyin said seriously, "How can that be? I'm not a devil. I've always liked to convince people with my appearance. If it really doesn't work, I'll convince people with my virtue." Lu Chen stared at this scholar who she couldn't tell if he was a good or bad person. She pursed her lips and shook her head with a faint smile. She said, "It's not funny at all." Su Fengyin dismissed it with a smile. He distributed the dishes and then buried his head in wolfing down the food. Lu Chen covered her face with one hand and chewed slowly. She had the demeanor of a lady who didn't speak while eating. She put down her chopsticks at the same time as Su Fengyin. She hesitated for a moment and said, "I thought you'd say some pretty words to comfort me." Su Fengyin saw that she still had leftovers and didn't stand on ceremony. He moved the leftovers in front of him and said as he ate, "Didn't you say that you hate it when people lie to you? No matter if you believe it or not, in my eyes, you're still that delicate girl. You're not good looking, but you're not much better." Lu Chen asked, "Really?" Su Fengyin lowered his head to eat and nodded. The storm lasted for half the afternoon and gradually calmed down. Su Fengyin pushed open the window and looked out. It was already dark enough to delay their journey. He walked out of the courtyard with Lu Chen. The unlucky inn worker had already been carried away. There was no sign of any retaliation from the inn. Su Fengyin bought her a veiled hat on the street and rode slowly on his horse. Perhaps because she knew that they were about to reach the destination, Lu Chen's words became more lively. She began to take the initiative to ask Su Fengyin about some of the stories of Jianghu. She told him about the Wu family's 9 swords break 10,000 horsemen shop. She didn't have any intention of testing him. The pair of man and woman both intentionally and unintentionally became less scheming. Lu Chen herself was also a lively girl. Otherwise she wouldn't have gone out alone with Jianghu. Where there's a gathering, there's a parting. As they neared the provincial city, the width of the relay road was no less than the main roads of Beiliang. Lu Chen gazed at the majestic city sprawled on the yellow sand like a colossus. Her heart palpitated with fear. She bit her lip and fell into a daze. After a long time she looked back, wanting to catch a glimpse of that man and bid him farewell. However, he was already nowhere to be seen. She smiled. Even though she couldn't see him, she still turned her horse around and waved her hand. In the distance, Su Fengyin, who had seen this scene, slowly leaned back on his horse's back. He held a weed stalk in his mouth. Chapter 566. Lu Chen showed the customs letter and rode into the city alone. Perhaps she was used to the desolate desert where the wind and sand were like knives. She was a little absent-minded when she first saw the bustling city. She almost collided with a group of patrolling soldiers. After apologizing, she thought that she would have to reveal her identity and backing to avoid the entanglement. She did not expect that the other party only asked her to ride slowly and not to hurt people. Luqian was not used to it. As the capital of the Xia state, Wuhou City was located within the oasis. It was also known as the Wall-less City. Due to the fact that Helian Wuwei was confident in his military strength, he declared that even if the Liang dynasty had the guts to attack the Xia state, he did not need to use the city walls to resist the enemy. In the southern dynasty, Luqian had also heard of the valiance and battle prowess of the soldiers in Wuhou City. If it was said that Murong Baoding, who had made it onto the martial arts rankings in Orange Province, had single-handedly stolen the glory of one of the provinces, then Xia Province had been split between two armies. One of them was the Kung Bijuan of the Wuhou Martial Marquis, whose battle prowess was second only to the Imperial Guards and the Tuoba God of War's Beijing army. Luqian had originally thought that with such a strong battle prowess, the soldiers in the city would inevitably be arrogant and willful. Thus, she did not think too deeply about the strange phenomenon and headed towards the Spring of Joy. Beside the spring was the Thunder Temple. Every rainy season, thunder shook the sky and could be heard within a radius of 10 miles. Near the Spring of Joy, there were many mansions, where the most powerful figures of the province lived. After the remnants of the spring and autumn period fled to the north, only the northerners lived in the north while the south was gradually handed over to the big clans of the southern dynasty. The boundaries were clearly defined. However, the Zhong family owned a private mansion in the north of the Spring of Joy. It was only because they were able to live in the north that the south was gradually handed over to the big clans of the southern dynasty. Although the Lu family was a big surname, they were only able to live in the north of the Spring of Joy because of their glory. Luqian had just approached the Spring of Joy when a luxurious carriage hung with silk bells came towards her. The 100 thin jade bells were naturally far more pleasant than camel bells. Compared to him, Luqian was really like a firefly's light. How could the light of a firefly compare to the light of the sun and the moon? In the Liang dynasty, there were as many military officers as there were hairs on a cow. They could only command 300 to 400 soldiers and had to be controlled by others. In Beimang, it was 100 times more expensive, especially the military officer of a military town at the border. He could be considered to have taken a big step forward. Moreover, Zhong Tan was still young and well-versed in both the pen and the sword. His literary talent was appreciated by the empress and he was a rare scholar in Beimang. Zhong Tan's temperament was boorish, but he liked to wear scholarly clothes and was not pretentious. He was on good terms with Dong Zhuo. Back then, it was he who led the 3,000 Jingalong cavalry to kill Qin Jibao who had crossed the border. It would be strange if such a person did not have a meteoric rise in power. However, every time Luqian saw the smiling Zhong Tan, she would feel uncomfortable and fearful from the bottom of her heart. She could not pinpoint why she did not like this person's way. She could only explain herself. The military officer of the Liang dynasty was a military officer of the Imperial Examination, a military officer of the Imperial Palace. In Beimang, the first military officer of Beimang. Immortal was a military officer of the Imperial Examination, a military officer of the Imperial Palace officer. His empress was Imperial and had the Imperials, the Imperial of the Imperial to the Imperial, the Imperial was. The Lu Zhou Imperial was that of the Imperial SS Imperial Conan, S Imperials, the Imperial of the Imperial was the of the Imperial of Imperial for the of in the. Luqian was originally half a daughter-in-law of the Zhong family in name. Sitting in the same carriage as Zhong Tan was not considered to be against the customs. Moreover, with the prestige of both the Zhong and Lu families, there was no need for them to be bothered by those gossips. There was an ice pot in the carriage. In a place like this, one tael of ice was one tael of gold. Neither the rich nor the noble could afford it. There was an average-looking maidservant sitting quietly by the side. She did not seem to be attending to the Zhong family's heir. Zhong Tan took out a pair of silver pliers and picked up a piece of ice for Luqian and the maidservant. Luqian shook her head and declined politely. The maidservant, however, did not know the rules and accepted the ice pot with a slight crunching sound. She seemed to have sensed that there were outsiders around and it was inappropriate. She quickly covered her mouth to reduce the noise. Zhong Tan was tall and slender with long arms like an ape. He bent down to lift the curtain of the carriage and draped it over his shoulders so that Luqian could enjoy the scenery of the Spring of Joy. There was a wide bluestone path by the side of the spring, nestled in the shade of the trees. The western region was filled with sandstorms and the sun was scorching. The wind and sand were stirred up. However, if one were to hide under the shade of the trees, one would be able to cool down very quickly. It was unlike Jiangnan where it was stuffy and hot and there was nowhere to hide. Zhong Tan looked at Lu Qin and said softly, "Miss Lu, I'm sorry that you've been wronged." Lu Qin lowered her eyebrows and remained silent. Zhong Tan turned his head and sighed. "It's the Zhong family that has let you down." Lu Qin raised her head and hesitated to speak. Zhong Tan smiled and straightened his body as if he was sitting upright. He waved his hand and said slowly, "I don't have the habit of rubbing salt on my family's wounds. If Miss Lu doesn't want to talk about the details of this trip, you can just write it down on a piece of paper and ask someone to pass it to me when the time comes. You won't have to face those nagging old fellows. However, I'll say this in advance. When the family grows bigger, there will naturally be a lot of gossip. Miss Lu, you can go in one ear and out the other. I'll also inform the elders in the family and treat it as if the Zhong family never gave the Lu family any letter of engagement. We won't taint Miss Lu's innocent reputation. Zhong Tan can guarantee that when Miss Lu has a happy marriage of 100 years, the Zhong family will not hesitate to come and congratulate you." Lu Qin raised her head and looked directly at the future head of the Zhong family. Her eyes were resolute as she said, "I was born as the daughter-in-law of the Zhong family and will die as a ghost of the Zhong family. I'm willing to be a widow for the Zhong family. When I see my father, I'll persuade him to allow a ghost marriage." Zhong Tan looked out of the window, his brows tightly knitted. Lu Chen's tone was bleak as she said, "This is Lu Chen's life. I can't escape it." When they arrived at the Zhong family's mansion, Zhong Tan got off the carriage first. He stood by her side and personally escorted her down the carriage. In the eyes of many people at the door who had spent their entire lives studying people's hearts, it was destined that they would have a different feeling in their hearts. Zhong Tan walked her to the Yi Gate. He did not cross the threshold, saying that he was going out of the city to burn incense at the Thunder Monastery. After bidding farewell to Lu Qin, he returned to the carriage. The maidservant smiled without the slightest bit of flattery, as if she had met a long-time friend. Zhong Tan was also accustomed to this. She held a piece of ice in her mouth and puffed out her cheeks. She asked in a soft and vague voice, "Won't the Zhong family be disgusted by you excusing Lu Qin like this and pulling her out of the whirlpool? It's just that you've provoked her to marry into the Zhong family, forcing Zhong Gui's family to not leave. Be careful not to pick up a sesame seed and lose a watermelon." Zhong Tan sat cross-legged with a leisurely expression. He chuckled softly and said, "I'm not curious about how Zhong Gui died and who killed him. The Zhong family has too many enemies." Lu Qin was humiliated and returned. "For a woman, this is already the limit. If I continue to provoke her, not only will she collapse, I'm afraid the Lu family will also be angry. Marriage between the Zhong and Lu families is the general trend. Since I was born as the eldest son, I must have a long-term vision." Lu Chen's determination to marry into the underworld and live as a widow shows that she is not a short-sighted woman. Such an interesting woman should not be destroyed in Shihe Prefecture. It's only right for me to help her block some of the wind and rain. The maidservant clamped the piece of ice with one hand and held it in the air with the other, afraid that it would fall. Zhong Tan lowered his head and bit into the ice, chewing it in big mouthfuls. She put down the silver clamp and said, "A woman's thoughts are fickle. This relationship may not be enough to make her stand on your side in the future." Zhong Tan said indifferently, "She's not the kind of person who knows her place. She'll definitely stir up trouble in the future. I'll just continue to protect her." She suddenly covered her mouth and laughed. "Actually, as long as you take her body, everything will be settled." Zhong Tan said with an aggrieved face, "I'm afraid of ghosts." She kicked Zhong Tan lightly. Zhong Tan laughed and said, "You're much prettier than her." She sighed. Lu Qin can be considered to have survived. Zhong Tan clicked his tongue and said, "Does this count as me doing a good deed every day? When we reach the Thunder Rolls Temple later, I'll have the confidence to burn incense." A storm that could overturn an ordinary person was blown away by a gentle breath from some people. Chapter 567. Outside the city, about 3 li away from the city, Su Fengyan rode his horse on the road that was filled with pedestrians. He deliberately restrained his chi so that his fata morgana was gone. He was sweating profusely like a normal person. Su Fengyan was not in a hurry to enter the city. There were trees on both sides of the road, but there were rules and regulations. The watermelon farmers who sold watermelons did not dare to approach the road. They only set up their tents 20 steps away from the road to sell their watermelons. Su Fengyin dismounted his horse and led it out of the road. He walked on the gravel road. Merchants and travelers often haggled. Those who were good at haggling could bargain from 50 copper coins to 10 copper coins for a caddy of watermelons. Su Fengyin led his horse slowly and saw a robust old farmer who had erected a wooden board in front of his stall. Su Fengyin looked at the suntanned watermelon farmer. The latter, who was squatting on the ground, also looked at him. The latter seemed to have noticed that Su Fengyin's money pouch was not empty. He grinned and said, "Young master, pick one? If it's not tasty, I don't want a single copper coin from you." Su Fengyin, who had wanted to continue forward, stopped and joked, "Even if it's tasty, if I say it's not tasty, will you still take my money?" The old farmer's eyes were not like those of the unruly people. He said, "I still won't take your money." Su Fengyin let go of the reins and squatted down. There was a pile of watermelons, but he did not know where to start. "Uncle, help me pick one." The old farmer brought over a small stool for Su Fengyin. He knocked on the watermelons and put them down. Then he picked a watermelon that was not small. It was about 7 to 8 caddies. He skillfully smashed it with his fist. The watermelon was brittle and roughly split in half. He handed it to Su Fengyin. Su Fengyin opened the watermelon and asked while eating, "This watermelon is not cheap." The old farmer smiled and said, "Other places can also lower the price to 10 copper coins for a caddy. But my watermelon field is good and the melons are sweet. Young master, take a look. My melons here are more than 5 caddies. Some of the bigger ones are more than 10 caddies. In fact, no matter how I sell them, it's not expensive. If you have shallow eyes and only pick the big ones, a caddy of melons won't even be 10 copper coins. But in my opinion, 7 to 8 caddies are the best. They are about 12 or 13 copper coins. A caddy. My family also has some business to make money. I don't want to rely on this to make a fortune. Also, I don't want to have a dirty relationship with the nearby melon farmers who only rely on selling melons to make a living for a few copper coins. It's not easy for people to go out into the world. It's enough to have enough to eat and wear." Su Fengyin did not expect the old farmer to be so talkative. He smiled and said, "No wonder old brother has such spirit. It turns out that you have a big heart." The melon farmer, who was already 60 years old but did not show the slightest signs of decay, also cut open a melon. He did not eat the core of the melon. He started from the edge and left the good stuff for last. It was the same as Su Fengyin's way of eating. He was a little stingy. When the old farmer saw this scene, he smiled and said, "I have also read some books, but not many. When I speak, I like to steal some words from books. I'm afraid that a scholar like young master will look down on me." Su Fengyin said self-deprecatingly, "Uncle, you are scolding me." The old man wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve and laughed heartily, "I don't dare. I really envy scholars." Su Fengyin nodded and said, "All day long they point at the rivers and mountains, rule the country and pacify the world. Seems like they can do anything. Without them it is impossible. In fact, they can't do anything. Uncle, if a scholar comes to sell melons, can he sell more than the surrounding melon farmers?" The old man shook his head and said, "Young master is generalizing. Scholars also have powerful characters who are good at civil and martial arts. During the spring and autumn period there were a lot of Confucian generals." As if he was afraid that his words would annoy the young master and that Su Fengyin would not pay, the old melon farmer said with a smile, "Scholars have a scholar's work. After earning 1,000 zhong millet from books and a house of gold, it is better to be able to cry out for the common people. Selling melons will be handed over to an old man like me. Well water does not interfere with river water and we can all live a good life. For example, young master, when you were young you carried a book to study. Reading 10,000 books and traveling 10,000 li was the best thing." Su Fengyin chewed on the watermelon and said with a smile, "Uncle's experience can be said to be insightful. Indeed, there are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the marketplace." The old melon farmer was particularly happy to be flattered by a scholar. Every wrinkle on his weathered face revealed a sense of comfort and contentment. "Young master, you can listen to this old man's nonsense. You are a real scholar." Su Fengyin smiled and asked, "Then this melon?" The old farmer was stunned for a moment. With a helpless expression he said, "I'll sell it to you for 50 copper coins. I can't go any lower." Su Fengyin finished eating more than half of the watermelon. He took out a small piece of silver from his money pouch. It was about 100 copper coins. He handed it to the old melon farmer, who spoke well but could not be considered too elegant. He said, "Don't give me any extra money. Just treat it as buying 2 melons and giving one to uncle to eat." The old melon farmer stared blankly for a moment before praising, Who said that scholars can't sell melons? If young master sells melons, I guarantee that it won't take more than a few years for you to buy a sizable residence in the city. Su Fengyin also said helplessly, Uncle, if you say so, I really can't eat a second melon. The old farmer said straightforwardly, listen to what young master is saying. In a moment this old man will give you a cloth bag. Take 2 melons and hang them on the horse's back. When you get to the city, find an inn with well water to chill them. You can fish them out before you talk. They are very cold. After Su Fengyin finished eating the melon, he sat on a small stool and looked at the scenery in Wuhou City. Perhaps it was because he was in an oasis he looked along the relay road. The clouds were thick and heavy, layer upon layer, and fell straight down. It was as if they were about to press down on the city. It was as if the clouds of the 9th heaven were hanging down. There was only a fine line between heaven and earth. In this fine line, there was a building with a raised eave in the city that was the most eye-catching. Following Su Fengyin's line of sight, the old farmer said, that is Lei Ming Temple. Once you enter the temple, you will see 2 rows of 18 heavenly kings with fearful eyes. Those who are timid will feel guilty and won't dare to burn incense and worship Buddha. Outside the temple is Shiha State's famous Spring of Joy. Even the bodhisattva who glares at Vajra would lower his eyebrows. Scholars and beauties with prominent status would be happy to tour the temple. The Spring of Joy has become more and more foul in recent years. In fact, there is nothing to see. If young master believes in Buddha, it is better for you to go to Lei Ming Temple. Young master, don't worry. There are many important people in the city. However, it is hard to say that there are none who openly bully men and women, but they can be counted with one's fingers. Young master is also a scholar, so it is even more impossible for them to bully you. Su Fengyin smiled, Uncle, if you say so, then it can be seen that Shiha State's Jidushi not only rules the army, but also governs the government. He is worthy of being a pillar of the imperial court. The old farmer smiled, shook his head and said, I said that it is not accurate. Su Fengyin looked at the Lei Ming Temple that really towered into the clouds. He muttered to himself, mortals seek freedom all their lives. The squatting old farmer held a hollow melon and sighed, the bodhisattva is happy for nothing. Both of them looked at each other and smiled. After Su Fengyin stood up, the old farmer really picked 2 melons and put them in 2 cloth bags for him. Su Fengyin did not refuse and accepted them calmly. He hung one on each side of the horse's back. After getting on the horse, he sat on the horse's back and cupped his fists to bid farewell. The old farmer waved his hand with a smile. In life, people who meet by chance meet and then part. It cannot withstand scrutiny. Most of the time they will never meet again. It is very rare for them to not hate each other and even leave a good impression. Su Fengyin did not think about this. He only thought that he met an interesting old man from Beimang. In his heart, he was still thinking about the upcoming sneak trip to Wuhou City. Perhaps it would be as dangerous as Tuoba Chunsen's assassination and hunt. In the past, in Beiyang, which seemed to be an iron bucket but was actually surging with undercurrents, people from all walks of life came to seek revenge on him. All kinds of stories and legends, countless joys and sorrows, could be compiled into a book, 100 Ways to Assassinate the Butcher Su Shao and the Hedonistic Prince, and a book, Assassin's Men of Sacrifice Encyclopedia. Most of these dead people did not change until death. Even if they had to sacrifice their lives, they would still fly into the fire. However, many of the so-called blood feuds could be traced back to his grandfather's generation. But when it came to killing His Royal Highness, no one would be soft-hearted. Su Fengyin knew that when he succeeded the king of Beiyang one day, the number of assassinations would only increase and not decrease. The reason was very straightforward. If he could not kill the butcher, who claimed that even the king of hell did not dare to accept him, wouldn't it mean that he could not kill a child of Beiyang who could not even compete for military power? If Chen Jibao did not want to kill Su Fengyin, there were plenty of people who wanted to kill him. There was no need for the white-clothed warrior Immortal to kill him with a borrowed knife. Su Fengyin carried his sword, his box and his melons and headed straight for Wuhou City. Chapter 568. Zhong Tan's gentle attitude had unknowingly become a protective talisman for Lu Chen. This made Lu Chen, who had prepared for the worst, feel as if she was waiting for a knife to slit her neck, but instead she was waiting for a feather to brush against her neck. She was pleasantly surprised and somewhat at a loss. It was probably Zhong Tan's instructions that she was specially arranged to stay in a small lakeside building in the Zhong family's other residence, where she could enjoy a rare shade. Zhong Shintong and his younger brother Zhong Liang, one was a Beimang great general with great authority, the other was a top-ranked Devil Path great warlord. Presumably they would not bicker with a girl from the Lu family. However, the Lu family's temporary forbearance did not mean that the Lu family could be indifferent. After all, Jianghu was not worth mentioning in front of his elder brother Zhong Tan. Compared to the descendants of the great clans of the southern dynasty, he was still a first-rate talent. It would be unreasonable if the Lu family did not take the initiative to explain his sudden death in a foreign land. At this moment, Lu Gue was standing in front of the window of the small house, quietly listening to his daughter narrate her painful experience. From beginning to end, he did not interrupt, question, or console her. Lu Gui's expression was sorrowful, suppressing her depression, doing her best to speak in a calm tone. Lu Qin did not admit that she had made any mistakes. Some girls were really born actors. As the head of the A family Lu family, Lu Gue had a slender figure, and was worthy of the evaluation of a handsome man. Although his hair was slightly white, he was still a handsome man who could make a girl's heart sway. This was especially true for women who had tasted the flavors of love and sex. Only then did Lu Gue slowly turn around and stare into his daughter's eyes. Lu Qin subconsciously withdrew her gaze. No matter how much she wanted to mend it, in front of someone like Lu Gue who had been immersed in the imperial court for half his life, it was futile. Moreover, no one knew a girl better than her father, so how could she hide it so well? However, Lu Gue, who understood her clearly, smiled sadly. He walked closer to Lu Qin, removing the veil that she had not had time to change off. Gazing at the almost unfamiliar and tattered face, he gently placed his hands on her tight shoulders. Shaking his head, he said, "If father did not care about you, how could he only have one daughter? Whether the story you told is true or false, father is well aware of it. As for whether we can deceive the Zhong brothers, that is up to fate." Lu Chen's eyes reddened. She was about to spill the beans and spill the beans. At this moment she clenched her fists, either intentionally or unintentionally. Her fingertips pierced her palms and she sobered up a little. She bit her lips and rested her head on Lu Gui's shoulder. Lu Gue patted her back gently and said, "Zhong Gui's body has not been found yet. If I'm not wrong, it will be a cenotaph. Are you really willing to marry someone from the mortal world?" Lu Qin sobbed and said, "This is the duty of an unfilial daughter." Lu Gue was speechless. After Lu Gue left, the small house near the spring returned to its former tranquility. Lu Qin sat in front of the dressing table and looked down to see a bronze mirror. She waved her sleeve and threw it out, smashing it against the wall. A general is afraid of a new armor, and a beauty in her twilight years is afraid of a bronze mirror. However, she was still a young woman and had not married. After Su Fengnian entered Wuhou City, it was reasonable for him to choose a high vantage point to observe the geography of the Spring of Joy. However, he had been ill for a long time and was very familiar with assassinations and ambushes. He knew that there were many forbidden areas in the Thunder Pond. Bailiang Palace occupied a mountain as the king, with the prince's mansion as the center near Mount Qingliang as the center. The mansions of many generals and dignitaries were gradually spread out according to their positions and titles. Among them, there were also a few high-class restaurants and inns that could be used as a good vantage point to observe the prince's mansion. However, all of these precious vantage points that made it convenient to observe the prince's mansion were firmly under the control of the mansion's secret agents. When new faces from outside the city first entered the city, they would first choose these spots. 9 out of 10 of them would be secretly killed if they climbed the stairs. The reason why the last one lived longer was because the Bailiang Palace wanted to cast a long line to catch a big fish. They thought that they were smart when in fact, it was no different from committing suicide. Su Fengnian later learned that during the short period before he turned 20, every time the mansion's maids and servants went out, there would be men of sacrifice following them. Chu Lushan was personally responsible for every detail. He found no less than 60 assassins and strangled them to death, pulling out the radishes and bringing out the mud. Several high-ranking Bailiang officials' residences became uninhabited residences overnight. Therefore, Su Fengnian only chose a low rise and that was slightly further away from the Spring of Joy to check in. He seemed to casually ask the waiter about a few sightseeing spots in Wuhou City. From the waiter, he learned that in 2 days it would be the 15th day of the month. The incense at Laming Temple was at its peak. Nobles and travelers from outside the city, as well as wealthy merchants who were well off, liked to go to Laming Temple on the 1st and 15th day of the month to worship a bodhisattva, or to light or add oil to a longevity green lotus lantern. However, the tribute for a small lantern would cost at least 100 taels of silver. Those who were devout Buddhists would easily give away several dozen taels of gold. It was a bottomless pit.